Before the darkness falls, there is always a quiet room and the soft, trembling note of a lonely violin. Listen closely, and you can almost hear the echoes of a world that used to be. It is a world of gas lamps casting long, gentle shadows across the damp cobblestones of a provincial town. The air here is thick with the scent of old paper, polished wood, and the faint, sweet perfume of blossoming linden trees drifting through open windows. In this house, nestled comfortably within the polite and orderly streets, music is the very air the family breathes. Pianos hum from behind closed doors, voices rise and fall in practiced scales, and the grand dreams of an ambitious father fill every corner of the parlor. Here lives a boy. He is pale, with bright, searching eyes and a frame too delicate for the rough and tumble games of the neighborhood children. He is a child born into a sanctuary of sound, surrounded by the velvet drapes of privilege and the comforting, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. In these early, fragile years, the boy is a vessel of quiet sensitivity. He absorbs the world around him with a painful intensity. He feels the weight of his father's desperate need to be respected, to be seen as a master of high culture, an opera singer who built a conservatory of music to prove his worth to the world. He feels the strict, unwavering gaze of his mother, whose faith demands an impossible perfection, a flawless presentation of the self to the watchful eyes of their neighbors. And so, the boy learns to play. He tucks the wooden body of the violin beneath his chin, resting his cheek against the cool varnish. He learns the delicate dance of the bow, the precise pressure of the fingers upon the tightly wound strings. For a time, the music is a gentle refuge. When he plays, he does not have to speak. When he plays, the confusing, overwhelming world outside his window fades into a soft blur. He can pour his unspoken fears, his quiet sadness, into the rising melodies. The notes float upward, soaring toward the ceiling, carrying away the heavy things a little boy cannot yet understand. In the warm glow of the evening lamps, he is just a child creating something beautiful out of silence. But the sanctuary of the home is a fragile glass sphere, and the world outside is made of heavy stones. When the boy steps out of the heavy wooden doors of his father's conservatory and into the bustling schoolyard, the music stops. Here, among the shouting, running children, he is no longer the cherished son of a musical director. He is different. His voice, much higher and softer than the other boys', becomes a target. His delicate features, his quiet demeanor, are seen not as virtues, but as weaknesses to be exploited. Children, in their innocent cruelty, sense the vulnerability of the outsider, like wolves circling a fawn in the winter snow. They tease him. They mock the high pitch of his words. They invent cruel nicknames that stick to him like burrs in a woolen coat. They whisper rumors they have heard from their parents, quiet, insidious murmurs about his family's past, about hidden bloodlines and whispered secrets. The words themselves matter less than the feeling they carry, the heavy, suffocating feeling of being unwanted, of being profoundly and irreparably fundamentally flawed. Imagine the walk home from school on a gray afternoon. The wind is biting, pulling at his scarf. He walks a little faster, his head down, clutching his books to his chest. He can feel the eyes on his back, hear the stifled laughter echoing down the narrow street. Inside his chest, a small, quiet panic beats against his ribs like a trapped bird. He wants to cry, to let the hot tears spill over his cheeks and wash away the sting of their words. But he knows, with the deep, instinctual knowledge of a wounded creature, that tears will only invite more cruelty. Tears are a surrender. Tears are proof that they have reached him. So, he holds it in. He reaches the safety of his front door, turns the heavy brass knob, and steps into the hushed, musical twilight of his home. He does not tell his father about the boys in the yard. He does not cry into his mother's apron. Instead, he walks slowly up the stairs to his room, opens the velvet-lined case, and takes out his violin. He tightens the bow. He lifts the instrument. But something is changing. The music he plays is no longer a gentle release of sorrow. It becomes something sharper, something more controlled. He practices with a fierce, burning intensity, repeating the same difficult passages over and over until his fingers ache and the pads of his skin grow thick with calluses. He is learning to master the instrument, but he is also learning to master himself. He is learning that if he can control the strings, if he can force them to produce the exact, perfect note every single time, he can create an armor of excellence around himself. In the quiet solitude of his room, the boy begins to build a wall. Brick by invisible brick, he takes his insecurities, his fears of being mocked, his desperate, lonely need to be accepted, and he buries them deep within a fortress of his own making. If the world is cruel, he will be untouchable. If the world finds him weak, he will become flawless. He will be the smartest, the most disciplined, the most unyielding. He will never give them a reason to laugh again. But building a wall to keep the pain out also keeps the warmth from coming in. As the years drift by like leaves on the autumn river, the boy grows taller, his features sharpening, his eyes taking on a pale, guarded stillness. The world around him is changing, too. The grand, secure empire of his early childhood is crumbling, giving way to an era of hunger, confusion, and deep national sorrow. The wealthy patrons who once filled his father's conservatory can no longer afford the luxury of music. The house that was once warm and filled with light becomes quiet and filled with the heavy, unsaid anxieties of ruin. The boy watches his father, once a proud and imposing figure, shrink beneath the weight of unpaid bills and lost prestige. He sees the polite smiles of their neighbors turn into cool indifference. He learns a silent, devastating lesson, that status is an illusion, that respect must be commanded, and that the world is a harsh, unforgiving place where only the strong survive. The weakness he sees in his father's failure terrifies him more than the bullies in the schoolyard ever did. He vows, in the deepest, most silent chambers of his heart, that he will never be vulnerable. He will never be a victim of circumstance. He still plays the violin. He plays it beautifully, with a technical brilliance that leaves audiences breathless. But the soul has slowly begun to drain from the music. The notes are crisp, precise, and brilliant as cut diamonds, but they are just as cold. The music is no longer a bridge between his heart and the world. It is a performance, a demonstration of his superiority, a shield held up between himself and the audience. One evening, while practicing a particularly demanding sonata, he pulls the bow across the strings with too much force. There is a sharp, sudden snap. A string breaks, curling back upon itself like a dying insect. The sound echoes in the quiet room, a harsh, discordant interruption of the perfect melody. He stops. He looks at the broken string, the frayed ends resting against the polished wood. For a fleeting moment, a memory stirs, a memory of being a small boy, crying alone in the dark, wishing for a friend, wishing to belong. It is a tender, painful feeling, welling up from beneath the ice he has so carefully cultivated. But he does not let it surface. He blinks, and the emotion is gone, shoved back down into the dark cellar of his mind. He calmly sets the violin down, reaches for a fresh string, and begins the methodical, mechanical process of replacing it. He twists the peg, tuning the new string until it is perfectly taut, perfectly in pitch. There is no frustration, no sigh of annoyance. There is only a chilling, absolute control. The boy has learned how to survive. He has taken the soft, yielding parts of his humanity and slowly, deliberately, frozen them solid. He has learned to look upon the struggles of others not with empathy, but with a cold, analytical detachment. He has taught himself that feelings are a liability, that kindness is a luxury for the weak, and that power, the power to control oneself, and eventually, the power to control others, is the only true safety in a chaotic world. As he stands by the window of his room, looking out at the sleepy, darkened streets of Halle, he is no longer the frightened child running from mockery. The moonlight washes over his pale face, casting long, sharp shadows across his cheeks. He is quiet, poised, and utterly empty of the gentle vulnerabilities that make us human. The music continues in the house below, a sad, lonely waltz echoing through the empty hallways. But up here, in the cold, clear light of the night, the silence is absolute. The violin string has been replaced. The instrument is perfect once more. But something fragile, something beautiful and deeply human within the boy has snapped forever, leaving behind only the cold, polished wood, waiting for the dark symphony to begin. There is a cold and heavy silence that follows the breaking of a proud man's heart, a stillness like the ocean just before a storm. For years, the young man from the musical home had found his shelter not in the soft melodies of his youth, but in the crisp, unyielding embrace of a naval uniform. The sea was a place of beautiful, absolute order. Aboard the gray steel ships that cut through the freezing waters of the Baltic, there were rules for everything. There was a place to stand, a way to salute, a time to sleep, and a time to wake. For a mind that craved control, for a heart that feared the messy, unpredictable nature of human emotion, the Navy was a sanctuary. He loved the smell of the salt air, the polished brass, the quiet hum of the engines deep beneath the deck. Standing on the bridge, staring out into the endless, dark horizon, he finally felt safe. He was an officer. He was someone of consequence. He had outrun the mocking laughter of his childhood. But the fortress he built was made of glass, and it took only a single, foolish misstep to shatter it entirely. It was not a failure of courage in the line of duty, but a tangled matter of the heart, a broken promise to a young woman, a perceived slight against the rigid code of honor that governed the officer class. The details of the scandal faded into the gray mist, but the consequence was absolute and devastating. The heavy wooden doors of a quiet tribunal room closed with a hollow thud, and in that single, breathless moment, the life he had so meticulously constructed was washed away like footprints in the wet sand. He was dismissed. Disgraced. Stripped of the uniform that had become his very skin. Imagine the agonizing train ride back to his family's home. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels against the iron tracks must have sounded like the ticking of a cruel, enormous clock. He sat by the window, watching the damp countryside roll by, dressed in civilian clothes that felt entirely too loose, entirely too ordinary. The protective armor was gone. Without his rank, without his ship, who was he? He was just a pale, thin young man with nowhere to go. When he arrived home, he locked himself in his room and wept. They were bitter, silent tears, the tears of a man free-falling into a deep, dark abyss, terrified of the ground waiting below. But even in the deepest shadows, the tide eventually turns. It was during these aimless, drifting days on the windswept shores of the Baltic coast that he met a young woman named Lena. The coast here is a place of stark, melancholy beauty. Pale sand dunes roll like frozen waves, held together by tufts of pale green grass that shiver in the constant breeze. The sky is often a canvas of soft grays and bruised purples. It was here, walking along the edge of the cold water, that their lives intertwined. Lena was the daughter of an impoverished aristocratic family. She carried herself with a quiet, fierce pride, her eyes holding a steady, unblinking focus. She was a woman who had grown up watching her family's status slip through their fingers like dry sand, and she possessed a deep, burning hunger to reclaim her place in the world. When she looked at the disgraced naval officer, she did not see a failure. She did not see a man weeping in the ruins of his career. She saw a vessel. She saw a sharp, analytical mind, a desperate need for belonging, and a deep, unspoken capacity for absolute devotion to a cause. Their courtship was built on quiet conversations in the dim light of modest cafes, their hands wrapped around warm cups of tea as the wind howled outside the frosted glass. He poured out his shame, his fears, his feeling of being utterly discarded by the world. And Lena, with a soft, persistent voice, smoothed away his anxieties. She became his anchor in the fog. She spoke to him in hushed tones about a new movement sweeping across the country, a rising tide of men who wore different uniforms, who promised to sweep away the old, failing structures and build something entirely new. She was already deeply devoted to this cause, her heart captured by the absolute certainty of their marching songs and their promises of national rebirth. "You are meant for more than the sea," she would whisper to him, walking arm in arm along the empty beach. "You are meant for the future." Her ambition became his oxygen. He began to see the world through her eyes. In her unwavering belief in him, he found the strength to rebuild his shattered ego. She was the architect of his resurrection, gently but firmly pointing him toward a door he would never have opened on his own. With her encouragement, and relying on the quiet influence of a family friend, a meeting was arranged. It required a journey south, away from the salt and the sea, toward the heavy, ancient architecture of Munich. He arrived carrying only a small suitcase and the fragile hope of a second chance. He was led into a quiet, unassuming office. The room smelled of floor wax and stale cigarette smoke. Behind the desk sat a man who looked more like a mild-mannered schoolteacher than a leader of a radical movement. The man spoke softly, peerless in his quiet intensity, his eyes studying the nervous former officer. The movement, the man behind the desk explained, was growing. But to truly hold power, they needed to know things. They needed to understand their enemies, their rivals, even their own members. They needed a system, a web, a quiet machine that could process whispers and turn them into leverage. "If you were tasked with building an intelligence service from nothing," the man asked, handing him a blank sheet of paper and a pencil, "how would you do it?" The room fell silent. The young man looked at the blank page. For a fleeting second, he might have remembered the blank sheets of sheet music from his childhood, waiting for notes to be placed upon them to create a symphony. But there was no music here. There was only information. There was only the cold, hard logic of control. He picked up the pencil. His hand did not tremble. For the next 20 minutes, the only sound in the room was the soft scratch of lead against paper. He drew boxes. He drew connecting lines. He organized departments, subdepartments, filing systems, and chains of command. He channeled every ounce of his need for order, every scrap of his analytical mind, into designing a perfect, unfeeling machine. When he slid the paper back across the desk, the man looked at it, his eyes narrowing in quiet approval. The diagram was flawless. It was the blueprint of a spider's web, designed by a mind that understood exactly how to wait in the dark. He was hired immediately. He returned to Lena not as a broken man, but as a man reborn. They married in a modest ceremony, binding their lives and their ambitions together forever. They moved into a small, cramped apartment, the walls thin, the furniture sparse. But they did not care. They were building an empire in the shadows. His first office was nothing more than a tiny room with a borrowed desk, a single, clattering typewriter, and a stack of empty index cards. There were no grand parades here, no cheering crowds, no medals to be worn on the chest. The work was profoundly solitary and suffocatingly quiet. But he loved it. He loved the meticulous nature of the task. He would sit for hours under the warm, yellow glow of a desk lamp, carefully cutting articles out of newspapers, listening to the gossip of informants, and typing names onto the small white cards. Every card was a human life. A rival politician, a dissenting journalist, a neighbor who spoke too loudly in a tavern. He cataloged their habits, their friendships, their debts, and their secrets. He filed them away in little wooden boxes, row upon row, perfectly alphabetized. In the quiet of the night, while the rest of the city slept, he sat at his desk, surrounded by these boxes. He would run his fingers over the tops of the index cards, feeling the immense, silent power they held. The boy who had once been mocked in the schoolyard, the officer who had been humiliated and discarded, now held the private lives of thousands of people in his hands. He could open a drawer and end a career. He could pull out a card and silence a voice. Lena would sometimes stand in the doorway, watching him work. She would bring him a cup of hot coffee, resting a hand gently on his shoulder. He would look up at her, the harsh light reflecting in his pale eyes, and smile a thin, quiet smile. They had found their place. He had put away the crisp white uniform of the Navy. In its place, he now wore a different suit, one that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. It was a uniform that belonged to the shadows. The transformation was complete. The delicate, sensitive boy who played the violin was entirely gone, buried beneath layers of ambition, resentment, and an obsession with control. The man who sat at the desk, filing away the secrets of his fellow citizens, had learned the most terrifying lesson of all, that true power does not roar. It whispers. It waits. It watches from the quiet corners of the room, patiently gathering the threads of human frailty, ready to pull them tight. And as the sun set over the distant Baltic Sea, leaving the cold beaches in total darkness, a new, much deeper shadow began to stretch its way across the heart of the continent, born in a quiet room, one index card at a time. There is a particular kind of silence that falls when a whole city forgets how to trust. It does not happen all at once, in a sudden crash of thunder or a sudden plunge into darkness. Instead, it arrives softly, like a creeping autumn frost that slowly silences the crickets in the tall grass. It begins with a hesitation at the bakery counter, a word swallowed before it can be spoken. It continues with a glance over the shoulder on a busy street, a sudden dropping of the voice in a crowded tavern. And before long, the open, noisy warmth of neighborhood life is replaced by a careful, measured quiet. This is the world being built by the man in the shadows, the architect who has moved from his small, borrowed desk into grander, colder rooms. His web is expanding, thread by invisible thread, reaching out from the capital and stretching across the cobbled squares and quiet country lanes of the nation. If you were to walk through the corridors of his new domain, you would not hear the clashing of swords or the shouting of armies. You would hear something much more terrifying in its absolute banality. You would hear the relentless, rhythmic clattering of hundreds of typewriters singing a dry, mechanical song. You would hear the soft rustle of turning pages, the opening and closing of heavy metal filing cabinets. Within these rooms, the architect of whispers is constructing a monument not of stone, but of paper. Millions upon millions of pale, crisp sheets of paper. To him, these files are a masterpiece of order. They are the beautiful, logical realization of his need for control. But if you look closely at the ink upon those pages, you begin to see what they really are. Every file is a human life, flattened and pressed between cardboard covers. Every index card is a collection of someone's hopes, their careless mistakes, their private fears, and their quietest conversations. Imagine a man named Elias, a watchmaker who has lived on the same narrow street for 40 years. He knows the exact moment the morning sun will catch the brass pendulum in his shop window. He knows the names of all the children who press their noses against the glass to watch the gears turn. For decades, his shop has been a place of easy laughter, a place where neighbors gather to complain about the weather or share a piece of harmless gossip over a cup of warm, dark coffee. But now, a chill has entered the shop. It is a draft that no fire can warm. Elias notices that his oldest friend, the tailor from next door, no longer stops in to debate the news of the day. The tailor hurries past with his head down, clutching his coat tightly around his chest. When a customer comes in to retrieve a repaired pocket watch, they do not linger. They pay an exact change, offer a stiff, formal nod, and step quickly back out into the gray afternoon. Elias sweeps the floor of his empty shop, the soft scratching of the broom the only sound in the room. He feels a heavy ache in his chest, a deep and confusing sorrow. He does not know what he has done wrong. He does not know that 2 weeks ago, at a dinner party across town, someone mentioned his name in passing, noting that he had once read a book by an author who is no longer favored. That fleeting remark, lighter than a feather, was caught in the architect's web. It was whispered to an informant, typed onto a card, and filed away in a dark cabinet. And though Elias has never been arrested, though his door has never been kicked in, the shadow of that file has fallen over his life. The unseen eyes have turned toward him, and his neighbors, sensing the shift in the wind, have quietly stepped away. This is the true, devastating power of the architect. He does not need to build prisons for everyone. He only needs to build a prison of suspicion within the mind of every citizen. It changes the very fabric of the family home, the sacred space where people have always gone to feel safe. In the evening, when the heavy curtains are drawn against the night, husbands and wives sit by the hearth and speak in hushed, fragile tones. They look at their children, sleeping peacefully in their beds, and feel a terrifying new anxiety. Children, with their bright eyes and innocent, eager tongues, are the greatest danger of all. A child does not understand the danger of a joke told at the dinner table. A child does not know that a song learned from a grandmother might be a forbidden melody. At school, under the watchful eyes of instructors who are themselves terrified of making a mistake, children are asked what their parents talk about in the evenings. And so, the home becomes a place of guarded words. The spontaneous laughter of a family game is stifled. The bedtime stories are carefully chosen. Love remains deep and fierce, but it is a love wrapped tightly in fear. Yet, even in the deepest winter, beneath the frozen earth, small roots hold tight to life. Where there is suffocating darkness, the human spirit finds quiet, desperate ways to strike a match. We see it in the private, unrecorded moments of everyday heroism. We see it in the schoolteacher who, realizing a student is about to say something dangerous, gently interrupts with a question about mathematics, steering the child back to safety with a warm, reassuring smile. She risks her own position, perhaps her own life, for the sake of that one small, fragile moment of protection. We see it in the letters written late at night, and the pale glow of a single candle. Imagine a young woman sitting at a simple wooden desk, the house silent around her. Her husband has been taken away for questioning, swallowed by the vast, quiet machine of the state. She does not know where he is. She does not know if he is warm, or if he is afraid. Her heart is a bruised, aching thing, fluttering with panic. But she picks up her pen. She writes a letter she knows she cannot mail. She writes to him anyway. She tells him about the frost on the window pane, tracing delicate fern-like patterns against the glass. She tells him that the neighbor's cat had kittens, and that she saved the softest, grayest one for him. She pours all her longing, all her desperate hope, into the looping letters on the page. She writes that she loves him, that she is waiting, that the world is still beautiful because he is in it. When she is finished, she folds the paper carefully into a tiny, perfect square. She lifts a loose floorboard beneath her bed and tucks the letter into the dark space alongside a dozen others. It is an archive of love, hidden directly beneath the watchful eyes of the state. It is a quiet, stubborn refusal to let her heart be turned to ice. She will not let the architect of whispers take her humanity. These are the stories that do not make it into the heavy metal filing cabinets. The architect, sitting in his immaculate office, reviewing his charts and his perfectly organized index cards, sees only data. He sees the flow of power, the elimination of threats, the cold mechanics of a society brought entirely under his invisible hand. He does not feel the warmth of the tear that falls on the young woman's letter. He does not understand the quiet, profound courage of the watchmaker who, despite the silence in his shop, still winds every clock with tender care, waiting patiently for the day when the chiming will be joyous again. The architect believes that if he can catalog every secret, he can control the human soul. He believes that fear is the strongest force in the universe. And as he looks out over the rooftops of the capital, sensing the millions of people holding their breath in the dark, he feels a deep, chilling satisfaction. The music of his youth is entirely gone, replaced by the perfect, unbroken silence of submission. But he is wrong. He does not know that trust, though bruised and battered, does not easily die. It merely goes underground. It retreats into the quiet glances shared between strangers on a train. It hides in the extra loaf of bread left on a doorstep in the middle of the night. It gathers strength in the whispered prayers of mothers holding their children close. The web of whispers is vast, and the shadow it casts is long and terribly cold. It has broken the peace of the cobbled streets and locked the doors of the neighborhood taverns. It has made ordinary men and women into ghosts within their own lives, haunting their own homes with words they are too afraid to speak. The country has been blanketed in a heavy, suffocating snow of paper and ink. But deep within the quiet rooms, behind the drawn curtains and the locked doors, the embers of the human spirit are still glowing, soft and warm, waiting patiently for the long, dark night to end. The heaviest weight in the world is sometimes carried on the very tip of a silver fountain pen. Imagine a morning so quiet that the only sound is the gentle, rhythmic falling of snow against the window pane. It is the deep midwinter, a time when the earth usually sleeps under a thick, peaceful blanket of white. By the edge of a serene, frozen lake, surrounded by ancient pine trees holding the fresh snow on their heavy branches, sits a grand, elegant villa. The air outside is crisp and painfully cold, turning every breath into a fleeting cloud of silver mist. Inside the villa, however, it is wonderfully warm. A large fire crackles and pops in an ornate marble fireplace, casting a soft, golden glow across the polished oak floors. The room smells of expensive roasted coffee, rich tobacco, and the faint, sweet scent of leather-bound books. It is a room built for comfort, for quiet contemplation, and for the polite exchange of refined ideas. On this particular morning, a group of men gather around a long, magnificent mahogany table. They arrive in heavy woolen coats, brushing the snowflakes from their shoulders, greeting each other with polite, hushed voices and respectful nods. They are educated men, men of status and quiet authority. Their uniforms are immaculate, their collars perfectly pressed, their hands clean and manicured. They do not look like monsters from a dark fairy tale. They look like fathers, like neighbors, like civil servants attending to the tedious but necessary administrative duties of a vast, expanding empire. At the head of this table sits the architect of whispers. He watches the men with his pale, unblinking eyes, his face a mask of serene composure. He has brought them here, to this beautiful, isolated sanctuary, to solve a problem. But the problem they are discussing is not a matter of failing crops, or building bridges, or organizing train schedules. The problem is human life. Yet, listening to the gentle hum of their conversation, you would never know it. There is no shouting in this beautiful room. There is no anger, no pounding of fists upon the table, no passionate declarations of hatred. The language they use is terribly, chillingly polite. It is the language of bureaucracy, a sterile, bloodless vocabulary designed to distance the mind from the heart. They speak of logistics, of evacuations, of final solutions, and special treatments. They use quiet, empty words to build a massive, invisible machine of unspeakable sorrow. The disconnect is profound and terrifying. As the men sip from delicate porcelain teacups, gently stirring in sugar with little silver spoons, they are charting the destruction of entire communities. They look down at the crisp white papers arranged neatly before them. The pages are filled with columns, rows, and numbers. To the men at the table, these are simply statistics. They are abstract puzzles to be solved through efficiency and organization. But every single mark on those pages is a breathing soul. They do not see the faces. They do not see the tired eyes of a grandfather who has worked the same piece of land his entire life. They do not see the young mother singing a lullaby to her restless infant in the dark. They do not hear the laughter of children chasing a stray dog through a muddy village square. The polished wood of the conference table acts as a shield, reflecting only their own quiet competence back at them, keeping the messy, desperate reality of human suffering safely locked away outside the frosted windows. When the meeting is softly brought to a close, a silver fountain pen is uncapped. It glides smoothly across the bottom of the final document, leaving a dark, glistening trail of ink. It is a tiny, almost silent gesture. A flick of the wrist. But that dark ink upon the pale paper is a poison that will seep out beneath the heavy wooden doors of the villa, bleeding across the snow-covered landscape, searching for the innocent. The men rise. They shake hands. They share a glass of fine cognac, admiring the beautiful view of the lake as the winter sun begins to set, painting the ice in shades of violet and pale rose. They feel a deep sense of accomplishment. The paperwork is filed. The machine has been given its instructions. Let us follow that dark ink as it travels far away from the warmth of the roaring fire. Let us leave the quiet villa and journey to a narrow, drafty apartment in a crowded city hundreds of miles away. Here, the snow does not look like a beautiful painting. It is gray, mixed with the soot of the chimneys, turning into cold slush on the cobblestones. Inside a modest room, the air is thick with a different kind of silence. It is not the silence of polite administration, but the heavy, suffocating silence of absolute dread. A piece of paper has arrived. It bears the official stamps, the precise, typewritten letters ordered by the men at the grand table. It is a notice of relocation. Imagine a woman sitting at her worn kitchen table. Let us call her Eliska. The light in the room is fading, but she does not turn on the lamp. She sits with the piece of paper in her trembling hands, reading the same cold, detached sentences over and over again. The ink from the villa has finally reached her door. The instructions are brutally simple. Her family is to report to the train station before dawn. They are allowed to bring only what they can carry in a single piece of luggage. How do you pack an entire life into one small leather suitcase? Eliska moves through her home like a ghost. The apartment is filled with the quiet accumulation of a life built with love. There is the heavy woolen blanket her grandmother knitted, smelling faintly of lavender and old cedar. There is the small, chipped ceramic bowl she uses every morning to mix dough for bread. There is the stack of worn books by the armchair, the pages soft from years of reading by candlelight. She opens the suitcase on the bed. The hinges let out a soft, mournful creak. First, she packs for warmth. The thickest sweaters, the heavy wool socks, the worn winter coats. She folds them with slow, meticulous care, pressing the fabric down with her palms to make room. Every choice is an agony. To take the warm boots means leaving behind the photograph album. To take the extra blanket means leaving behind the small box of letters her husband wrote to her when they were young and full of hope. She walks to the small shelf in her daughter's room. Her daughter is asleep, her breathing soft and even, completely unaware that the world has quietly ended while she dreamed. Eliska looks at the row of simple wooden toys. She picks up a small, carved horse, its paint faded from years of tiny, affectionate hands. She traces the curve of its wooden back. She knows it will not provide warmth. She knows it will not feed them. But she wraps it carefully in a soft handkerchief and tucks it deep into the corner of the suitcase. It is a tiny, fragile piece of home, a desperate anchor in a world that has suddenly lost its gravity. Her husband stands in the doorway, his face pale and lined with a quiet, devastating sorrow. He does not speak. He simply crosses the room and wraps his arms around her. They stand there in the dim light, holding each other, swaying slightly in the stillness of their bedroom. There are no grand speeches. There is only the profound, silent understanding of two people trying to absorb a blow that is too massive to comprehend. In that embrace, there is a whole universe of love, a fierce, protective warmth that no bureaucratic order can ever extinguish. Before the sun rises, while the city is still wrapped in a freezing, impenetrable darkness, they step out of their apartment. They do not look back at the closed door. They cannot afford to. They walk through the silent streets, the heavy suitcase pulling at the husband's shoulder. The snow falls steadily, covering their footprints almost as soon as they are made. The cold bites at their cheeks and numbs their fingers. They hold their daughter's hands tightly, sandwiching her between them to protect her from the wind. As they pass the corner bakery, a door opens just a crack. A sliver of warm, golden light spills out onto the snowy pavement. An old woman, the baker's wife, steps out into the freezing air. She wears only her thin nightgown, her shoulders shivering. She does not say a word. She looks hurriedly up and down the empty street, her eyes wide with fear. Then, with a quick, trembling hand, she presses a warm, freshly baked loaf of bread into Eliska's coat pocket. Their eyes meet for only a second. In the baker's wife's eyes, Eliska sees tears spilling over her wrinkled cheeks. It is a tiny rebellion against the vast, cold machine. It is a quiet, desperate offering of humanity in a world that has decided to outlaw it. Eliska touches the old woman's hand, a fleeting brush of cold skin against cold skin, whispering a silent blessing before moving on into the dark. They reach the train station. The platform is crowded, yet eerily silent. Hundreds of families stand huddled together in the biting cold, their breath rising in a collective, ghostly fog. There are no tears left, only a numb, shivering exhaustion. A young boy, no older than 10, stands near them. He is alone, clutching a small, battered violin case to his chest. His coat is too thin, his lips blue from the cold. Eliska's husband slowly opens his own coat, steps behind the boy, and wraps the heavy wool around the child's trembling shoulders, pulling him back against his chest to share his warmth. The boy looks up, his eyes full of quiet gratitude, and leans back into the shelter of a stranger's embrace. This is the reality the men at the beautiful villa never see. They do not see the freezing mist of the train platform. They do not feel the agonizing weight of the single suitcase. They do not witness the breathtaking, heartbreaking beauty of a stranger sharing his coat in the darkest hour of the night. They believe that their ink has written the final word. They believe that by turning human beings into numbers on a page, they have erased their souls. But as the heavy steel doors of the train cars slide shut with a dull, final thud, the truth remains quietly, stubbornly alive in the darkness. The ink upon the snow may command the trains to move. It may steal the homes, the comfort, and the safety of the innocent. But it cannot touch the soft, worn wooden horse tucked safely at the bottom of a suitcase. It cannot undo the warmth of a freshly baked loaf of bread pressed into a trembling hand. And it cannot sever the invisible, unbreakable threads of love that bind a mother, a father, and a child together in the dark. Far away, the snow continues to fall on the grand villa by the lake, covering the roof in a thick, pristine white. The men sleep soundly in their warm beds, dreaming of order, of power, of a perfectly arranged world. But their world is only made of paper and ink. And even the darkest ink eventually fades, while the quiet, enduring resilience of the human heart echoes on, waiting patiently for the heavy winter to pass. Even the oldest stones will shiver when a cold enough wind blows through the valley. There is a city woven from golden light and deep, velvet shadows, resting softly along the curves of a gentle, winding river. For centuries, Prague was a place where history did not just happen, it lingered. It lived in the mist that rose off the Vltava water at dawn. It breathed in the quiet, echoing footsteps across the Charles Bridge, where ancient statues of saints and kings stood watch over the centuries, their stone faces softened by time and rain. It was a city of music, of poets scribbling in the corners of warm, smoky cafes, of a proud people who understood the deep, quiet strength of their own heritage. But seasons change, and sometimes, a winter arrives that threatens to never end. High above the cobbled streets and the spires that reach like fingers toward the sky, there sits a magnificent castle. It has always been the heart of the city, looking out over the red rooftops, a silent guardian of the bohemian spirit. Yet, on a gray, overcast afternoon, the soul of that castle was quietly eclipsed. A shadow stretched across the ancient courtyards as a new ruler arrived. The architect of whispers, the man who had built a vast, cold machine of paper and fear, stepped out of a sleek, dark car and walked through the heavy, ornate doors. He did not come as a guest. He came to take his seat in the halls of old kings. He came to place an invisible, suffocating crown of thorns upon the head of a beautiful city. When he looked down from the high windows of the castle, he did not see the beauty of the golden spires. He saw only a puzzle to be solved, a spirit to be broken, and a people to be brought to their knees. He brought with him a new kind of silence. It was not the peaceful silence of a heavy snowfall, nor the restful quiet of a house asleep. It was a heavy, aching silence. It was the sound of 1,000,000 people simultaneously learning to hold their breath. Down in the city, the change crept in like water seeping beneath a heavy wooden door. You could feel it in the mornings. Before the shadow fell, the early hours were a symphony of life. Bakers calling out to the milkmen, the clatter of horse-drawn carts over the cobblestones, the cheerful ringing of the tram bells, and the easy, open laughter of neighbors greeting one another across narrow alleyways. Now, the mornings are draped in a careful, measured hush. Let us ride the early tram with a man named Anton. He has driven this same route for 20 years. He knows every curve of the iron tracks, every spark that dances from the overhead wires. He used to know the faces of his passengers, too. He knew who would be running late, breathless and smiling. He knew the young students arguing passionately about philosophy, and the old men who would sit in the back and softly hum old folk songs. But looking in his rearview mirror today, Anton sees a different world. The tram is full, yet it is completely, terrifyingly quiet. Men and women sit with their shoulders hunched, their chins tucked deeply into their coats. They stare at the scuffed wooden floorboards or look blankly out the frost-covered windows. No one reads a newspaper, for the news is no longer their own. No one speaks, for words have become fragile, dangerous things that can shatter a life. At the third stop, Anton notices an empty seat. It is the seat where an old professor used to sit every morning, a man who always tipped his hat to Anton. The professor is gone. No one asks where he went. No one mentions his name. They simply leave the space empty, a silent memorial to a vanished friend. As a new passenger steps aboard, a young woman clutching her purse with trembling, white-knuckled hands, Anton does the only thing he can. He catches her eye in the mirror, just for a fraction of a second, and gives the smallest, gentlest nod. It is a tiny, invisible lifeline thrown across a sea of fear. I see you, the nod says. You are not alone in the dark. This is how the people of Prague learn to survive the heavy crown they have been forced to wear. They retreat into the deepest, most private sanctuaries of their hearts. When the universities are shuttered and the doors of learning are locked tight with heavy iron chains, the life of the mind does not stop. It merely goes underground. Imagine a young student, sitting by the fading light of her bedroom window. Her books, once proudly displayed on open shelves, are now a liability. She gathers them carefully, running her fingers lovingly over the embossed spines. She wraps her volumes of forbidden poetry in plain brown paper, tying them with rough twine. With the help of her father, she pries up a loose floorboard beneath her bed and tucks the books into the dusty, hidden dark. It is an act of profound, quiet defiance. The man in the castle wishes to erase their culture, to rewrite their history, to make them forget the beautiful songs of their ancestors. But by hiding the books, this young woman is preserving the soul of her nation. She is making a promise to the future, a vow that the words will survive the winter, waiting patiently for the day when they can be read aloud in the sunlight once more. As the days grow shorter and the cold settles deep into the ancient stones, fear becomes a constant, invisible companion. It walks beside you on the street. It sits across from you at the dinner table. It is the sudden, sharp knock at the door in the middle of the night that makes a mother's heart stop beating in her chest. There is a terrible legend whispered among the people of the city. It is the legend of the ancient crown of Saint Wenceslas, resting in the deepest, most sacred chamber of the cathedral. The myth says that any man who places the crown upon his head falsely, any usurper who tries to claim the spirit of Bohemia without a pure heart, will be cursed, doomed to fall within a year. The people whisper that the arrogant new ruler, the man with eyes like pale ice, went into the chapel. They whisper that he mocked the ancient kings, that he lifted the golden, jewel-encrusted crown and placed it upon his own head in a moment of supreme, mocking vanity. Whether the legend is true or not, the feeling it leaves behind is deeply real. The people feel they are suffering alongside their captive city, wearing their own crowns of invisible thorns. The decrees arrive swiftly, printed on harsh red paper and pasted to the beautiful stone walls of the squares. The lists of names grow longer. The disappearances become more frequent. Yet, in the suffocating dark, the human need for connection, for warmth, for love, continues to find a way. Like small green shoots pushing up through the cracks in a frozen pavement, everyday heroism blossoms in the quietest of corners. It is found in the kitchen of a modest apartment, where a family huddles together late at night. The curtains are drawn tightly, pinned at the edges so not a single sliver of light can escape. In the center of the table sits an old, wooden radio. The father turns the dial with painstaking slowness, his ear pressed almost directly against the fabric speaker. The volume is turned down to a barely audible whisper. They are searching through the static, through the roaring sea of interference, listening for a voice from the outside world. When they finally catch the faint, crackling sound of a broadcast from London, the mother closes her eyes and lets out a long, shaky breath. It is just a voice, tinny and distant, but in that moment, it is everything. It is a tether to a world that has not gone mad. It is the promise that they have not been forgotten. It is found in the long lines for bread, where women stand for hours in the biting wind. A young mother, her face pale and exhausted, realizes she does not have enough ration tickets to feed her children that evening. She looks down at her worn hands, fighting back the quiet tears of despair. Suddenly, she feels a soft pressure against her palm. The elderly woman standing behind her, a stranger with kind, weary eyes, has slipped a small, crumpled piece of paper into her hand. An extra ration ticket. There are no words spoken. The elderly woman simply looks away, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. But in that small, dangerous transfer, an entire universe of grace has been shared. The man in the castle believes he has conquered the city. He looks out over the misty rooftops and sees a populace cowed by his perfect, terrifying administrative machine. He sees compliance. He sees fear. He believes that by silencing the streets, he has silenced the soul of the people. But he does not understand the deep, ancient roots of the cobblestones. He does not understand the quiet strength of the river that has carved its way through the valley for millennia. The crown of thorns is heavy. It draws blood. It brings a profound, aching sorrow to the Golden City. Families are torn apart, and the beautiful, winding streets are haunted by the memories of those who have been swept away. But beneath the silence, beneath the lowered eyes and the tightly drawn curtains, the heart of Prague is still beating. It beats in the hidden books. It beats in the secret radio broadcasts. It beats in the shared glances on the morning tram and in the extra loaf of bread handed in the dark. As the night falls completely over the castle, turning its towering walls into black silhouettes against the starless sky, the city below seems to sleep a deep, enchanted sleep. But it is not the sleep of the dead. It is the patient, watchful rest of a people waiting for the spring. They are holding their breath, holding their memories, holding each other in the quiet dark, keeping the embers warm until the long, heavy winter finally breaks. There is an ocean of sorrow hidden in the sound of rain falling on a strange and foreign city. Listen to the steady, rhythmic drumming against the window pane. It is a gray, heavy afternoon in London, and the fog has rolled in off the River Thames, wrapping the damp streets in a thick, woolen embrace. The street lamps are hooded, casting only small, timid pools of yellow light against the wet cobblestones, hiding from the airplanes that sometimes drone high above in the night. It is a city holding its breath, a city built of sandbags and blackout curtains. But for a small group of young men gathered in the drafty rooms of a brick boarding house, the cold of the English rain is nothing compared to the deep, aching winter inside their hearts. These are the exiled sons of the Golden City. They are far from the winding river of their childhood, far from the ancient, proud castle that watches over their homes. When the dark shadow fell across their borders, when the borders themselves were erased by the stroke of a pen, these men refused to surrender. They slipped away in the dead of night. They walked across freezing mountain passes, hid in the dark corners of freight trains, and crossed stormy seas, carrying nothing but a quiet, burning refusal to be broken. They traveled until they reached this rainy island, looking for a way to fight back. But now, they are trapped in a terrible, suffocating waiting. To be an exile is to live as a ghost in a world that continues without you. They walk the busy streets of London in heavy woolen uniforms that feel just a little too stiff, a little too strange. They hear a language they barely understand, a rapid, clipped tongue that sounds nothing like the soft, melodic poetry of their homeland. When they order a cup of tea in a crowded cafe, they point and smile politely, but behind their eyes, there is a profound, unfathomable distance. They miss the simplest things. They miss the smell of sweet dough baking in the early morning. They miss the gentle chime of the clock tower in the old square. They miss the way the late afternoon sun would turn the stone spires of Prague into needles of solid gold. This homesickness is not a fleeting thought, it is a physical weight, a stone carried heavy in the chest that makes every breath feel like a labor. Imagine a young soldier named Tomas. He is only 20 years old, with soft, gentle eyes and hands that were meant to hold a carpenter's plane, not a rifle. He sits by the window of his cramped room, watching the raindrops trace slow, erratic paths down the glass. In his breast pocket, close to his beating heart, he carries a single, dried linden leaf. It is the national tree of his country, a tiny, fragile piece of the earth he loves. He reaches in and touches it with his fingertips, feeling its brittle edges. On the table in front of him is a blank sheet of paper and a bottle of ink. He wants to write a letter to his mother. He wants to tell her that he is safe, that he has enough to eat, that the English people are kind, even if their food is terribly bland. He wants to ask if the old stray dog still sleeps on their front step, and if the cherry tree in the garden has blossomed this year. But he cannot send the letter. The lines of communication are severed, guarded by the unseen eyes of the shadow that now rules his home. To send a letter would be to place a target on his mother's back. So, Tomas writes the letters anyway, and then he folds them away in a small wooden box. He is writing to ghosts. He is whispering into the void, hoping that somehow, the wind blowing eastward across the sea will carry the feeling of his love back to the quiet kitchen where his mother sits alone. In the evenings, the young men gather together. This is where they find their warmth. In the dim light of a smoky pub, or gathered around a meager coal fire in a shared sitting room, they create a tiny, invisible island of their homeland. They share their meager rations of tobacco, passing a single, hand-rolled cigarette from man to man with a quiet, reverent grace. Here, an older soldier named Karel becomes a father to them all. He sits in the corner with a needle and thread, quietly mending the holes in their heavy woolen socks. When the younger boys wake up in the middle of the night, startled by the wail of the air raid sirens, their faces pale and slick with cold sweat, Karel is there. He does not tell them to be brave. He simply puts a heavy, warm hand on their shoulders, hands them a cup of tepid water, and hums a very soft, very old folk psalm until their breathing slows down and the terror passes. In these small, unseen moments of profound tenderness, they keep each other alive. They are the embers of a dying fire, huddled close together to keep the warmth from fading completely. But then, the news arrives. It does not come all at once. It trickles in through the crackling static of hidden radios, through the hushed whispers of couriers who have risked everything to cross the sea. The news slips under the door like a freezing, poisonous draft. The architect of whispers has taken his seat in the castle. The young soldiers sit in silence as they listen to the reports. They hear how the quiet streets of their beloved city have been turned into a prison of fear. They hear the decrees. And worst of all, they hear the names. A beloved university professor. A kind shopkeeper who used to give them sweets when they were children. A cousin. A friend. Names of the innocent, read aloud from lists of the vanished. The fog outside the window seems to press harder against the glass. In that crowded room, the heavy, melancholic sorrow of the exiles begins to shift. It does not erupt into shouting. It does not become a wild, uncontrollable rage. Instead, it crystallizes. The sorrow turns into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. The tears dry on their cheeks. The music stops. They look at each other in the dim light, and they realize a terrible, absolute truth. Waiting is no longer enough. The safe, rainy streets of London have become a luxury they can no longer afford while their families are suffocating in the dark. A life lived in exile, while the soul of their nation is slowly crushed beneath a heavy boot, is not a life at all. They must do something. They must send a message, not written on hidden paper, but written in a language the shadow will understand. They must show the world, and they must show their own captive people, that the spirit of Bohemia is still breathing. A quiet meeting is called in a nondescript brick building. The room smells of floor wax and old paper. A man stands at the front, his face lined with exhaustion and deep sorrow. He does not give a fiery speech. He speaks softly, laying out the desperate reality of their homeland. He speaks of a mission. It is an impossible mission, a journey back into the very heart of the darkness. It is a plan to strike at the architect of whispers himself, to cut the head from the serpent that has coiled itself around their city. We need men who are willing to return, the officer says, his voice barely above a whisper. We need men who understand that they will likely not come back. He does not order anyone to go. He cannot. This is not a duty that can be commanded, it is a sacrifice that can only be freely given. The room is silent. The only sound is the ticking of a clock on the wall and the muffled sound of a car passing on the wet street outside. Then, in the back row, a young man slowly stands. He is a locksmith by trade, a man with a quiet smile and steady hands. He does not look at the officer. He looks to his left, at his closest friend, a young man who used to work on a farm, whose laughter has always been the brightest light in their dark exile. They do not need to speak. They have shared the same cold beds, the same terrible rations, the same agonizing nightmares. They have held each other's unspoken grief for months. They communicate entirely through a single, locked gaze. I will go, the first man's eyes say. Then I will go with you, the second man's eyes reply. The friend stands up beside him. They look forward, their shoulders squared. They have volunteered to step out of the safe, gray fog and back into the freezing winter of their homeland. They know they are walking toward a cliff, but they are choosing to jump so that their families might one day be free to walk the ancient, cobbled streets without fear. They are not supermen. They are ordinary boys who miss their mothers, who love the taste of fresh bread, who carry dried leaves in their pockets. And yet, in this quiet, unassuming room, they have just made the most extraordinary choice a human being can make. They have chosen love over safety. They have chosen to be the spark that will light the darkest night. As they walk out of the building and back into the London rain, the chill in the air does not seem to bother them anymore. The paralyzing weight of homesickness has lifted. They are going home. It will be a journey through the sky, a descent into danger, but they will finally see the snowy forests of their homeland once more. The embers have caught the wind. The fire has been quietly lit. And as the two friends walk side by side down the wet pavement, sharing an umbrella against the falling rain, they step out of the margins of exile and begin their long, quiet walk into the pages of eternity. There is a place where the mountains touch the low-hanging clouds, where the wind carries the scent of damp earth and the heavy, silent weight of unspoken goodbyes. Far away from the golden spires of their home, far from the ancient stone bridges and the winding river they love so dearly, the landscape shifts into something wild, rugged, and profoundly lonely. This is the edge of the world. These are the Scottish Highlands, a vast and quiet expanse of deep lochs, rolling heather, and gray, jagged peaks that pierce the eternal mist. It is a place of breathtaking, melancholy beauty, where the sky seems so vast it could swallow a man whole. Here, in the deep midwinter, the rain does not simply fall, it drifts like a fine, freezing curtain, washing the color from the hills until everything is painted in soft, bruised shades of violet and gray. The wind howls down through the glens, a lonely, ancient sound that rattles the windows of the solitary stone cottages scattered across the moors. To this desolate, beautiful place, the two young friends have come. They are far from the streets where they rode bicycles as boys. They are far from the warm, bustling kitchens of their mothers, and the quiet, smoky cafes where they once sat for hours, arguing about poetry and dreaming of the future. Now, they wear heavy, damp wool. Their boots are perpetually coated in thick, dark mud. Their hands, once soft, are now calloused and scarred from weeks of relentless, quiet endurance. They have come to these isolated hills to learn how to fall from the sky. They have come to learn how to move silently through the dark, how to endure the freezing rain without shivering, and how to hold a secret so tightly that it becomes a part of their very bones. But beneath the heavy woolen coats, beneath the practiced stillness of their faces, they are still just boys. They are sons. They are brothers. They are young men carrying a love for their country so vast and so painful that it aches in their chests with every breath they take in the thin, highland air. Imagine them on a late afternoon, returning from the moors. The light is fading fast, surrendering to the long, northern twilight. Their muscles ache with a deep, consuming exhaustion. They walk side by side, their shoulders occasionally brushing as they navigate the rocky path. They do not need to speak. In this profound isolation, their friendship has become a sanctuary. It is a quiet, unbreakable bond forged in the cold and the mud. When one stumbles on a slick patch of moss, the other's hand is instantly there, gripping his arm, pulling him upright. A shared glance. A small, exhausted nod. It is a silent promise, spoken 100 times a day, I am with you. You are not alone. They reach the small stone cottage that serves as their quarters. The heavy wooden door creaks open, letting out a faint, welcoming breath of warmth. Inside, the room is dimly lit by a single oil lamp and the low, orange glow of a peat fire smoldering in the hearth. The smell of the burning peat is earthy and rich, a comforting scent that attempts to chase away the damp chill of the moors. They strip off their wet coats, hanging them near the fire to steam. They sit on narrow wooden cots, the woven blankets rough against their skin. For a long time, the only sound in the room is the pop and hiss of the fire, and the steady drumming of the rain against the small, thick window panes. This is the hour when the quiet fears creep in from the shadows. During the day, while they are running across the hills or learning to navigate by the pale light of the stars, their minds are occupied. They can focus on the next step, the next breath, the next task. But here, in the stillness of the evening, the reality of what they have chosen to do settles over them like a heavy woolen blanket. They know they are returning to the dark. They know they are stepping directly into the path of the architect of whispers, the man who has brought the suffocating silence to their beautiful city. They understand, with a quiet, terrible clarity, that the road they are walking is a road that most likely only goes in one direction. One of the young men, with soft, thoughtful eyes, leans forward and rests his elbows on his knees. He stares into the glowing embers of the fire. He is not afraid of the jump. He is not afraid of the cold, or the danger, or even the end. His fear is something much more tender, much more deeply human. He is afraid of breaking his mother's heart. He is afraid of the grief he will leave behind, a heavy, invisible stone that she will have to carry for the rest of her life. Across the small room, his friend watches him. He is the one who usually has a quick smile, the one who tries to lift the heavy moods with a gentle joke or a remembered song. But tonight, he is quiet, too. He reaches under his cot and pulls out a small, battered wooden box. From it, he takes 2 pieces of crisp, pale paper, 2 envelopes, and a simple fountain pen. He stands up, crosses the narrow space between them, and gently places 1 piece of paper and 1 envelope on the blanket beside his friend. "We should write," he whispers, his voice barely rising above the crackle of the fire. The first young man looks at the blank paper. It looks incredibly vast, incredibly empty. What do you write when you cannot say where you are? What do you say when you cannot explain what you are about to do? How do you distill a lifetime of love, of gratitude, of desperate longing, into a few lines of ink? He picks up the pen. The metal nib is cold against his fingers. He unscrews the cap and rests the paper on a flat wooden board on his lap. He closes his eyes for a moment, listening to the Scottish wind howling outside the stone walls, and lets his mind travel thousands of miles away, back to a quiet, familiar street. He begins to write to his mother. His handwriting is slow and deliberate, the looping letters a delicate dance upon the page. He does not write of the freezing rain or the exhaustion. He does not write of the heavy, unspoken burden of the mission. Instead, he lies to her, with the most profound and beautiful gentleness. He tells her that the countryside here is peaceful. He writes about a patch of pale purple heather he found blooming stubbornly in the frost. He tells her that he is eating well, that the blankets are warm, and that he has a good friend who watches over him. He writes these things because he knows she will read this letter sitting at the kitchen table, perhaps wiping a tear from her cheek, and he wants her to imagine him safe. He wants to give her a final memory wrapped in comfort, not in fear. "I remember the smell of the sweet bread you would bake on Sunday mornings," he writes, the ink flowing smoothly across the page. "I carry that memory with me. Please do not worry for me. I am doing what I must, and my heart is full of love for you." He pauses, staring at the words. A single, hot tear escapes his eye, tracing a slow path down his cheek. It falls onto the bottom corner of the paper, blooming into a small, translucent star. He does not wipe it away. He lets it dry there, a silent, secret piece of his soul pressed forever into the page. Across the room, his friend is also writing. He writes to the sweetheart he left behind. He remembers the last time he saw her, standing in the fading evening light, the way the wind caught the edge of her scarf. He remembers the desperate, tight embrace, the feeling of her face pressed against his chest. He knows she is waiting for him. He knows she looks for his face in the crowds. And so, he writes a letter of quiet, agonizing release. He tells her she is the most beautiful thing he has ever known. He thanks her for the short, brilliant time they shared. But he also tells her to look up at the sun, to find joy in the coming spring, and to live a full and beautiful life, no matter what happens to him. It is a letter that asks for nothing and gives everything. It is a release from the promise of tomorrow, born of a pure, unselfish love. When they are finished, the room is completely silent. They fold the pages with meticulous, reverent care, tucking them into the small, square envelopes. They seal them, pressing their thumbs firmly along the edges. Tomorrow, an officer will come to the cottage. He will bring a canvas bag, and he will collect these letters. The letters will not be sent immediately. They will be held in the quiet dark of an archive, waiting. They will only be mailed if the young men do not return. They are letters addressed to the wind, whispers sent into the future, hoping to one day find their way home. The two friends look at the sealed envelopes resting on their cots. A profound peace seems to settle over the small stone room. The unspoken fears, the heavy burden of anticipating the grief of their loved ones, have been poured out into the ink. They have said their goodbyes. They have made their peace with the world they are leaving behind. Before they extinguish the lamp for the night, there is a soft knock at the heavy wooden door. One of them rises and opens it just a crack. Standing on the step, wrapped in a thick, knitted shawl against the driving rain, is the elderly woman who lives in the farmhouse down the glen. She has a face lined by decades of harsh Highland winters, but her eyes are warm and remarkably kind. She does not speak their language, and they do not speak hers. But she understands the universal language of boys far from home. She holds out a small, covered basket. Inside, wrapped in a linen cloth, are 2 warm, freshly baked scones and a small jar of honey. The young man takes the basket, his hands trembling slightly with sudden emotion. He looks into her eyes and offers a soft, profound smile of gratitude. She nods slowly, reaches out, and gently pats his cheek with her rough, warm hand, a mother's touch, given freely in the dark. She turns and walks back out into the mist, her lantern a small, bobbing star disappearing into the night. They sit by the dying fire and share the bread. It is sweet, and it is warm, and in that small, quiet moment of unexpected kindness, they are reminded of exactly why they must return to the shadows. They are fighting so that one day, mothers will not have to say goodbye to their sons in the dark. They are fighting so that kindness can outlive fear. As the last embers of the peat fire fade to a soft, glowing gray, the 2 friends lie down on their narrow cots. Outside, the wind continues its lonely song across the heather. But inside the cottage, there is only the slow, steady breathing of 2 young men who have made their peace with the dawn. The letters are written. The goodbyes are spoken in the silent chambers of their hearts. They close their eyes, wrapped in the quiet strength of their brotherhood, ready to step out of the Scottish mist and begin the long, quiet fall toward home. There is a moment between the earth and the stars where time simply stops holding its breath. High above the sleeping world, hidden within the velvet folds of the night, a metal bird glides through the freezing air. Inside the dark belly of this machine, the roar of the engines is a constant, heavy hum, a vibration that settles deep into the bones. The cabin is practically pitch black, illuminated only by a single, dim red light that casts long, soft shadows against the curved walls. Here sit the 2 friends. They are wrapped in layers of thick wool, heavy canvas, and leather, bundled so tightly against the biting cold that they can barely move. Strapped to their backs are the heavy silk parachutes, feeling less like wings and more like the immense, quiet weight of a whole nation resting upon their shoulders. They have left the safe, rainy streets of London far behind. The letters they wrote by the glowing peat fire, those fragile pieces of paper filled with love and unspoken goodbyes, are now tucked away in a quiet drawer across the sea. Now, there is only the forward motion, the steady, inevitable pull toward home. It is bitterly cold in the plain. Frost traces delicate, fern-like patterns along the edges of the small windows. The air they breathe out turns instantly into pale silver mist in the dim light. But despite the freezing temperature, their palms are warm. One of the young men looks across the narrow space at his friend. The face he has known since childhood is half hidden by a leather helmet and goggles, but the eyes are visible. They are wide, awake, and remarkably calm. In this final hour, the terrifying anxiety of waiting has burned away, leaving only a profound, crystalline clarity. The young man reaches out with a thickly gloved hand and gently rests it on his friend's knee. It is a simple, heavy touch. There are no words exchanged because the engines are too loud, and because there is simply nothing left to say. The touch says, "We are still together. We are almost there." His friend nods slowly, a small, courageous tilt of the head. A sudden shift in the hum of the engine signals a change. The metal floor beneath their heavy boots seems to tilt just a fraction. Then, the floor opens. A circular hatch is pulled away, and instantly, the howling, rushing wind of the deep night fills the cabin. With the wind comes a smell that stops the breath in their throats. It is the sharp, impossibly clean scent of pine needles, frozen earth, and heavy snow. It is the smell of winter in the Bohemian forests. It is the scent of their childhood. They breathe it in, a freezing draft that cuts straight to the heart, awakening memories of sledding down familiar hills, of hot tea by a warm stove, of a world that was once whole and safe. A light flashes above the open hole. Green. The time for waiting has ended. There is no dramatic shout, no pushing, no hesitation. The first young man simply shuffles to the edge of the opening. He sits on the cold rim, his boots dangling over the vast, terrifying emptiness of the night sky. He does not look down. He looks straight ahead, takes one final, deep breath of the freezing air, and simply lets go. He slips away into the dark, swallowed instantly by the roaring wind. A second later, his friend follows, stepping gently off the edge of the world, a solitary leap into the great unknown. The first sensation is a violent, chaotic rush of air, a tumbling through the freezing void. The wind screams in their ears, pulling at their clothes, blinding them with cold. But this chaos lasts only for a few heartbeats. Then, there is a sharp, sudden pull upwards. A cracking sound echoes in the night, like a heavy bedsheet catching the breeze on a clothesline. The canopy of silk blossoms above them, catching the air, filling with the night wind, and pulling tight. And suddenly, the world is perfectly, beautifully silent. The roar of the plane's engines fades away into a distant, gentle hum, leaving only the soft whisper of the wind moving through the suspension lines. They are hanging suspended in the sky, drifting down beneath enormous domes of dark silk. It is a feeling of impossible peace. After months of agonizing preparation, after the heavy burden of the secrets they carry, this descent is a moment of pure, floating grace. They are no longer soldiers in exile. They are simply two human beings, gently cradled by the night, drifting down through the cold air like two solitary snowflakes falling in the dark. Snow has begun to fall around them. Thick, heavy flakes dance in the moonlight, swirling around the parachutes, brushing against their cold cheeks like tiny, frozen kisses. The sky above is a canvas of deep indigo, dusted with the pale silver of 1,000 stars. Below them, the landscape of their homeland begins to reveal itself. It is a sea of ancient, rolling forests, entirely blanketed in pure, untouched white. The pine trees look like thousands of dark, sleeping sentinels, holding the heavy snow on their drooping branches. The moonlight casts long, soft blue shadows across the frozen clearings. There are no city lights, no roads, no signs of the cruel war that has scarred the earth. From up here, the world is pristine. It is quiet. It is deeply, profoundly innocent. What does a man think about as he floats down toward a land where he is hunted? He does not think of the shadow in the castle. He does not think of the cold, mechanical files or the whispered betrayals. As the young man drifts closer to the earth, his mind is filled only with love. He thinks of the soft, flour-dusted hands of his mother, kneading dough on a quiet Sunday morning. He remembers the sound of his father's pocket watch ticking in the hallway. He recalls the feeling of the warm summer sun on his face as he lay in the tall grass near the riverbank. He gathers these memories around him like a protective cloak against the biting cold. They are the reason he has jumped. He is not falling into the darkness to bring violence. He is falling to bring the light of these memories back to a place that has been forced to forget them. Every inch he descends is a reclaiming of his home. Every breath of the freezing air is a quiet rebellion. The tops of the pine trees are rushing up to meet him now. The silence of the fall is broken by the soft, rushing sound of the wind through the needles. He bends his knees, keeping his feet together, remembering the countless hours of practice on the rainy Scottish hills. But there is no mud here. There is only the deep, welcoming embrace of the Bohemian snow. He hits the ground. It is a soft, muffled impact, the snow cushioning his fall as he rolls backward into the freezing white powder. The silk canopy above him collapses with a gentle sigh, the fabric settling over the snowdrifts like a discarded ghost. For a long moment, he does not move. He lies on his back in the deep snow, staring up at the patch of starry sky visible through the canopy of the pine trees. His chest heaves, his breath pluming in the air. His heart is beating a frantic, beautiful rhythm against his ribs. He is alive. He is home. Slowly, he pushes himself up. The snow is up to his waist, impossibly cold and powdery. He unclips the heavy harness, letting the buckles fall away with a dull clink. A few yards away, he hears the soft rustle of movement. He turns, peering through the dark trunks of the trees, and sees a shadow rising from the snow. It is his friend. They have landed safely, close to one another, guided by the unseen hand of fate. They move toward each other, their boots sinking deep with every step, the snow squeaking softly under their weight. When they meet, they do not speak. They simply throw their arms around each other in a fierce, silent embrace. They hold onto one another tightly in the freezing forest, two boys who have just fallen from the stars, sharing a profound, unspeakable relief. But the peace of the landing is fragile, and the night is still moving. They cannot leave a trace of their arrival. With quiet, urgent hands, they begin to gather the massive silk parachutes. They pull the fabric through the snow, folding it, crushing it, trying to tame the billowing material. The silk is cold and wet, stinging their bare hands. They find a thick cluster of low-hanging pine branches, the ground beneath them dry and dark. They drag the parachutes into the shadow, burying the silk under piles of dead needles, heavy branches, and sweeping layers of fresh snow. They hide the harnesses, the helmets, anything that might speak of the sky. They work until their breath comes in ragged gasps and their fingers are completely numb. When they are finished, they stand back and brush the snow from their coats. The forest looks exactly as it did before. The falling snow is already beginning to fill their footprints, erasing the evidence of their descent, wiping the canvas clean. The young man kneels down. He takes off his thick glove, exposing his bare hand to the biting air. He reaches into the snow, digging past the freezing white powder until his fingertips brush against the hard, frozen earth below. He presses his palm against the soil of his homeland. It is completely frozen, yet to him, it feels like the warmest thing in the world. It is the dirt of his ancestors. It is the earth that holds the roots of the linden trees and the foundations of the ancient stone bridges. He closes his eyes and lets a single, quiet tear slip down his cheek, freezing almost instantly in the cold air. It is a tear of profound reverence, a silent greeting to a mother who has suffered in his absence. He stands up, pulling his glove back on. He looks at his friend. The playful boy from the Scottish cottage is gone, replaced by a man of quiet, unwavering resolve. They look out into the dark, endless expanse of the woods. Somewhere beyond these trees, beyond the frozen hills and the sleeping villages, lies the Golden City. Somewhere in the dark, families are huddled around cold stoves, whispering prayers for a dawn they cannot yet see. The two friends turn their collars up against the wind. They step away from the buried silk, moving softly, carefully, disappearing into the shadows of the pines. They are no longer falling. They have become part of the winter forest, silent and unseen. They are embers hidden in the snow, carrying a quiet, dangerous warmth toward the heart of the freezing shadow. And as they walk deeper into the night, the only sound left behind is the gentle, lulling whisper of the snowflakes, continuing to fall upon the dark and sleeping earth. True courage does not always roar. Sometimes, it is as quiet as a brass latch turning softly in the middle of the freezing night. The long, agonizing walk from the snowy Bohemian woods has finally ended. The two young men, who fell from the stars and buried their silk wings in the frozen earth, have navigated the desolate fields and the watchful eyes of the roadside patrols. They have slipped past the heavy iron gates and dissolved into the gray, winding streets of the Golden City. Prague. The city of their dreams, the city they have ached for in the rainy exile of the Scottish Highlands, is finally beneath their feet. But it is not the city they remember. It is cloaked in a heavy, suffocating silence. They are ghosts walking through their own home, moving only where the shadows are deepest. They are exhausted. Their heavy woolen coats are damp with melted snow and the cold sweat of constant, paralyzing vigilance. Their faces are pale, their cheeks hollowed by the wind, and their eyes are wide with the instinct of hunted creatures. Every shadow cast by a hooded street lamp looks like a sentry. Every distant footstep echoing on the ancient cobblestones sounds like a drumbeat of doom. They cannot stay in the alleys forever. The winter night is a cruel master, and the freezing fog rolling off the Vltava River bites straight through to their bones. They need a door to open. They need to find a single spark of humanity in a city that has been ordered to turn its heart to ice. Let us step out of the cold and into the story of an ordinary family. Imagine a modest apartment, up 3 flights of creaking wooden stairs in a quiet, unassuming neighborhood. Here live a mother and a father, a couple whose lives, like everyone else's, have been forcibly shrunk by the shadow in the castle. The father is a man with gentle, tired eyes, whose hands are stained with the faint blue ink of a quiet office job. The mother is a woman of profound, quiet strength, her hair pinned back, her aprons worn thin from years of tending to her family. They have a young daughter who sleeps in the small room down the hall, her dreams protected by the heavy blankets her mother wove by hand. They are not soldiers. They do not own weapons. They have spent the last months keeping their heads down, stretching their meager rations, listening to the terrifying silence of the city, and praying simply to be ignored by the unseen eyes of the architect. But then, deep in the night, the hour arrives. It is the time when the city is most still, when the fear is most potent. There is a soft, rhythmic knock at the door. It is not the heavy, terrifying pounding of the secret police that shatters the wood and stops the heart. It is a hesitant, desperate tapping, followed by a faint whisper through the keyhole. A password. A plea in the dark. The father stands in the narrow, unlit hallway, his breath catching in his throat. He feels the heavy, frantic hammering of his own heart against his ribs. He knows exactly what this knock means. The whispers of the resistance have traveled like a subterranean river through the city. He knows that turning the lock is the most dangerous thing a man can do in this new, terrifying world. To open the door is to invite the wrath of the shadow directly into his living room. It is a choice that could erase his family from the earth. He looks back over his shoulder. His wife is standing in the doorway of their bedroom, holding her knitted shawl tightly around her trembling shoulders. The moonlight catches the pale curve of her cheek. They do not speak. They cannot risk even a whisper. But in that long, agonizing second, an entire lifetime of conversation passes between them. They look at the door, and then they look at each other. They think of the country they love, bleeding quietly in the dark. They think of the mothers who must be weeping for the boy standing on the other side of that wood. The mother gives him a single, barely perceptible nod. The father reaches out. His hand shakes, but his resolve does not. He turns the brass latch. It clicks with a sound that seems as loud as a gunshot in the silent house, but the door swings open. The 2 young paratroopers slip inside, bringing with them the freezing, sharp scent of the winter night. The door is quickly, silently locked and bolted behind them. No grand speeches are made. The hallway remains dark. The mother simply looks at these 2 exhausted boys who are not much older than the university students who used to laugh in the city squares before the shadow fell. She sees their trembling shoulders. She sees the profound, desperate gratitude in their eyes. Without a word, she leads them into the small kitchen. She pulls the heavy blackout curtains perfectly tight, ensuring not a single sliver of light can betray them to the street below. Only then does she strike a match, lighting a small, dim candle that casts a warm, golden, fluttering glow across the room. From the cold stove, she takes a heavy iron pot. Inside is a simple potato soup, saved from their own meager dinner, meant to last them through the next day. She does not hesitate. She places it over a tiny, hidden flame. The smell of the warming broth begins to fill the tiny room. For the 2 young soldiers, sitting slumped in the wooden chairs, it is not just food. It is the taste of a miracle. It is the overwhelming, beautiful scent of home. She sets 2 chipped ceramic bowls on the table and ladles the hot soup into them. She cuts 2 thick slices of dark bread. The young men wrap their freezing, raw hands tightly around the warm bowls, closing their eyes as the heat seeps into their aching bones. The steam rises, mingling with the soft light of the candle. As they take their first spoonfuls, tasting the salt and the warm broth, the young man with the soft eyes feels a hot tear slip down his cheek, splashing silently into his bowl. For the first time since he leaped into the vast, terrifying emptiness of the night sky, he feels completely safe. The mother watches them eat. She does not ask them about their mission. She does not ask them what weapons they carry or what dark things they must do. She simply reaches out and gently rests her warm hand on the shoulder of the weeping boy. It is a mother's touch, universal and healing, a silent promise that for tonight, at least, the monsters cannot reach them. When the bowls are empty, they are led to a small, hidden alcove behind a heavy oak wardrobe in the corner of the apartment. It is cramped, and it is entirely dark, but the blankets the mother has laid out are clean and smell faintly of dried lavender and old cedar. The boys lie down, their exhaustion finally overtaking their adrenaline, and they surrender to a heavy, dreamless sleep. But as the paratroopers rest, the true weight of the night settles upon the parents. The mother and father return to their own bed. They lie perfectly still, staring up at the invisible ceiling in the dark. Outside, the city is quiet, but inside their minds, a terrifying storm is raging. They listen to the soft, rhythmic breathing of their little daughter in the room down the hall. They have crossed a line from which there is no return. They have risked her life. They have risked everything they own, everything they love. If the architect of whispers learns of this, if a neighbor notices a strange sound, if a single mistake is made, their family will be swept away into the dark, never to be seen again. They reach out under the heavy quilts and clasp their hands together, holding on so tightly their knuckles turn white. The fear is a physical ache in their chests, a suffocating, lonely burden that sits heavy on their lungs. Yet, as the hours tick by toward dawn, a profound, quiet peace begins to weave itself through their terror. They know the risk. But they also know that a city without a heart is already dead. They know that if no one opens their door, the winter will never end. They have chosen to be the heartbeat. They have chosen love over survival. In the days that follow, the small apartment becomes a quiet, holy sanctuary of everyday heroism. It is a delicate, impossibly dangerous dance. The father wakes up every morning, ties his tie, and goes to his office. He forces his face into a mask of perfect, untroubled calm. He must smile at the right times, nod politely to the soldiers on the street, and perform his duties flawlessly, all while carrying the heaviest, most lethal secret in the world directly behind his eyes. He must be entirely unremarkable. He must become a master of invisibility. At home, the mother performs daily miracles of mathematics and courage. She must stretch their tiny, inadequate rations to feed 2 grown men without drawing the suspicion of the local grocer. She takes a prized piece of family lace, a beautiful thing inherited from her grandmother, and trades it in the dangerous shadows of the black market just to secure an extra loaf of bread and a small wedge of cheese. She carries it home hidden deep in the lining of her coat, her heart pounding with every step. She washes the soldiers' dirt-stained shirts in the dead of night, wringing them out silently in the small basin and hanging them near the stove to dry before the morning light can reveal them. When the young man with the bright smile tears his heavy woolen coat on a piece of wire, she sits by the fading evening light, squinting her tired eyes, and mends the fabric with tiny, meticulous stitches. Her needle dips in and out of the heavy wool like a quiet, rhythmic prayer. These are not grand acts of war. They will never be recorded in the history books. But they are acts of profound, defiant love that hold the universe together. Confined to the shadows of the back room, the boys become a secret, treasured part of the family. In the hushed hours of the late afternoon, when the apartment building is empty and quiet, they sit on the floor and whisper stories to the little daughter. They tell her about the rain-swept hills of Scotland, painting vivid pictures of wild heather and deep, dark lochs, keeping her imagination alive in a world that wants to crush it. Sometimes, they leave small, folded notes on the kitchen table for the mother to find when she returns from the market. They are simple, heartfelt words written in elegant script, words of profound gratitude, quiet apologies for the danger they have brought, and promises that her boundless kindness will never be forgotten by the wind. They are strangers, brought together by a terrible, suffocating dark, yet they form a bond that is stronger than iron, forged in the quiet warmth of the hidden hearth. The architect of whispers sits in his grand castle, looking out over the misty rooftops of the city. He reviews his perfectly organized files, his vast network of informants, and his long lists of names. He is supremely confident that his web of fear is absolute, that the spirit of the people has been entirely broken. But he is blind. He cannot see behind the drawn curtains. He cannot catalog the warmth of a shared bowl of soup, or measure the steady, quiet courage of a father locking his door against the night. He does not know that the true, unbreakable strength of a nation is not found in its monuments or its polished conference tables, but in the hidden hearths of ordinary people. The paratroopers are the spark, falling from the night sky to ignite the dark. But these families, these quiet, terrified, beautiful people in their modest apartments, are the gentle hands that cup the flame and protect it from the wind. They are the silent guardians of the light, offering their own lives to keep the embers burning, waiting patiently, bravely, together in the dark. When the world is hunting you, time ceases to be a river and becomes a single, heavy drop of water, falling endlessly into a quiet pool. Listen to the absolute stillness of a hidden room. In the Scottish Highlands, the young man had to master the freezing rain, the grueling marches over the moors, and the terrifying plunge through the night sky. They were trained for movement, for endurance, for the swift, invisible strike. But no one, not even the finest instructors in the world, could teach them how to endure the agonizing, suffocating weight of simply waiting. In the secret alcoves and the curtained back rooms of the safe houses, the days do not pass, they accumulate. They pile up like dust in the corners of a forgotten attic. Imagine a Tuesday afternoon in late spring. Outside, the ancient city of Prague is beginning to thaw. The cherry blossoms are quietly blooming in the hidden courtyards, their pale pink petals drifting down onto the cobblestones. The air is turning sweet and warm. But inside the apartment, behind the heavy blackout curtains that are kept tightly drawn even in the midday sun, the world is locked in a perpetual, shadowy twilight. The two friends sit across from each other at a small wooden table. Between them rests a chessboard. The pieces are worn, their velvet bottoms rubbed smooth by years of play. But the boys are not really playing. They move the knights and the pawns with agonizing slowness, their eyes fixed on the board, but their minds are miles away. In this hushed twilight, the loudest sound in the universe is the ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway. Tick. 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 It is the heartbeat of the house. It is the steady, unyielding metronome of their exile. To a man who is waiting to commit an act that will change the course of history, every swing of the pendulum feels like a heavy physical weight settling upon his chest. Time becomes an enemy. It stretches out, elongating every shadow, amplifying every creak of the floorboards. The young man with the gentle smile rests his chin in his hands. He watches a single, bright beam of sunlight that has managed to pierce a tiny gap in the curtains. He watches the dust motes dancing in the light, swirling in chaotic, beautiful little galaxies. He watches them for hours. He has memorized the pattern of the floral wallpaper. He knows exactly which floorboard near the door groans under the weight of a footstep. His senses, honed to a razor's edge by danger, have nothing to attach themselves to in this quiet room. The adrenaline that kept him warm in the snowy forest has faded, leaving behind a cold, hollow knot of anticipation in his stomach. This is the true torture of the hidden life. It is the battle against one's own mind. When you sit in silence for too long, the ghosts begin to gather. The young men think of the letters they wrote in the Scottish cottage, safely tucked away in a drawer across the sea. They wonder if their mothers have felt a sudden, inexplicable chill. They wonder what will happen to the brave, quiet families who are hiding them. The father who goes to work every day with a perfect, calm smile. The mother who sacrifices her own meager rations so they can eat. The little girl who leaves her wooden horse outside their door as a silent offering of friendship. What will the architect of whispers do to them if the shadow falls upon this house? To keep the fear at bay, they develop quiet, meticulous rituals. Like a master watchmaker leaning over his workbench with a tiny magnifying glass, they tend to their tools. They sit on the edge of their narrow cots and disassemble their weapons. They do it blindly, trusting the practiced memory of their fingertips. They wipe down the cold, heavy metal with soft rags smelling faintly of machine oil. They check the springs. They polish the mechanisms until they gleam in the dim candlelight. They reassemble the pieces with a satisfying, metallic click. They do this not because the weapons need cleaning, but because the repetitive, precise motion grounds them. It reminds them of their purpose. It is a physical prayer, a focusing of the mind against the encroaching tide of anxiety. But they cannot stay in the room forever. The mission requires them to learn the city again, to track the movements of the shadow they have come to erase. Stepping out of the safe house and into the open air is like stepping onto the surface of another planet. The contrast is violently jarring. Imagine the young man walking down a bustling avenue in the late afternoon. He is dressed in a borrowed suit, a quiet, unassuming hat pulled low over his eyes. His hands are thrust deep into his pockets to hide their trembling. To the casual observer, he is just another clerk heading home from an office. But inside, his heart is a captive bird, throwing itself against the bars of its cage. Every face he passes could belong to an informant. Every dark, polished car that turns the corner sends a spike of ice through his veins. He walks with a measured, deliberate pace. He cannot walk too fast, or he will look like a man fleeing. He cannot walk too slow, or he will look like a man loitering. He must perform the exhausting, agonizing theater of being perfectly ordinary. He stops at a corner to buy a newspaper. The vendor is an old man with thick spectacles, sorting through the evening editions. The young man hands over a coin. His fingers brush the vendor's coarse skin. It is a tiny, fleeting contact, but it feels overwhelmingly real. "Beautiful evening for a walk," the old vendor murmurs, handing him the paper with a polite nod. The young man freezes for a fraction of a second. Is it a trap? Is it a code? Or is it simply an old man enjoying the spring air? He forces a soft, weary smile to his lips. "Yes," he replies, his voice steady and quiet. "It is a beautiful evening." He walks away, the newspaper folded beneath his arm, his lungs burning as he remembers to breathe. He turns the corner and leans against the cool stone of a building, closing his eyes, letting the dizzying wave of relief wash over him. The outside world is a blinding, terrifying theater, and he is a man reciting lines without a script. Yet, even in this landscape of terror, the city offers small, heartbreaking moments of grace. As he walks back toward the safe house, he passes a small park. Sitting on a wooden bench is a young mother, bouncing a laughing infant on her knee. The baby's pure, unburdened laughter rings out like a silver bell in the heavy air. The young man stops. He watches them from the shadow of a doorway. For a moment, the war does not exist. The shadow in the castle is gone. There is only the golden afternoon light, the green leaves of the chestnut trees, and the joyous, melodic sound of a life just beginning. He carries that sound back with him. He carries it up the creaking stairs, through the locked door, and into the dim, quiet room. He offers the memory to his friend like a precious gift, a reminder of what they are fighting to protect. They are not here to bring death, they are here to preserve the right of a child to laugh in a sunlit park without fear. As the days turn into weeks, the pieces on the vast, invisible chessboard begin to align. The watchmaker's gears are locking into place. The route has been studied. The sharp, hairpin curve in the road has been chosen. The habits of the tyrant have been meticulously mapped. The waiting is coming to an end. The evening before the chosen day arrives with a heavy, suffocating finality. The air in the apartment feels different. It is thick, charged with an unspoken electricity. The grandfather clock in the hallway seems to tick louder, faster, rushing toward the dawn. In the small kitchen, the mother of the house is ironing. She stands over the board, pressing the heavy, flat iron against the crisp white cotton of the young men's shirts. The hiss of the steam rises into the warm air. She moves the iron with slow, deliberate care, smoothing out every wrinkle, making the collars perfectly sharp. She knows what tomorrow is. She does not know the details, she does not know the target, but she sees the solemn, quiet light in the boy's eyes. She knows they are stepping out into the storm, and they may not return. She wants them to look their best. It is the only armor she can offer them. The boys sit at the kitchen table, watching her. They drink a final cup of warm, dark tea. The young man with the gentle smile reaches across the table and rests his hand near hers as she sets the iron down. "Thank you," he whispers. It is a simple phrase, but it holds the weight of 1,000 unsent letters. It holds his profound gratitude for her courage, for her soup, for her hidden bed, and for the motherly grace she has bestowed upon two strangers in the dark. She stops. She does not look up, because if she does, she knows she will weep, and she will not send them into the morning with tears. She simply places her warm, flour-dusted hand over his. She squeezes it tightly, a fierce, protective grip. "God be with you," she murmurs, her voice trembling like a fragile leaf in the wind. That night, they do not sleep. They lie on their narrow cots in the dark alcove, staring up at the invisible ceiling. The silence of the city presses in around them. They do not speak of the mission. They do not review the plan, it is etched into their bones. Instead, in the darkest, quietest hours of the night, they whisper of home. They talk about the smell of the river in the summer. They talk about the girls they danced with at the village festivals. They talk about the taste of fresh cherries picked straight from the branch. They gather all the beautiful, simple things of the world and hold them close, weaving them into a shield of light against the approaching dark. The tick of the watchmaker has reached its final hour. The agonizing wait is over. The dawn is beginning to bleed a pale, bruised purple into the sky above the ancient spires. The two friends rise from their beds. They dress in the freshly ironed shirts, buttoning their coats with calm, steady hands. The trembling has stopped. The ghosts have retreated. They are ready. They step out of the hidden room, leaving the quiet sanctuary behind, and walk down the stairs toward the breaking day, carrying the heavy, beautiful burden of their entire nation into the morning light. There is a single, suspended heartbeat between the drawing of a breath and the changing of the world forever. It is a morning woven from soft gold and gentle breezes. The long, heavy grip of winter has finally released the city, and spring has arrived with a quiet, breathtaking grace. Along the winding streets and the riverbanks, the chestnut trees have burst into vibrant, leafy life. The air is sweet, smelling of blooming lilac and the damp, warm earth of the hidden gardens. The sky above is a vast, untroubled canvas of pale, brilliant blue. It is the kind of morning where one only wants to walk slowly, to turn their face up to the sun, and to forget that the world is broken. At a sharp, bending curve in the road, in a quiet neighborhood where the tram tracks gleam like silver ribbons in the light, two young men are standing. They wear light spring coats, their collars turned up slightly against a lingering morning chill. To the ordinary people passing by, the woman carrying a woven basket of fresh bread, the elderly man walking his slow, sleepy dog, the children skipping toward school, these two young men are entirely unnoticeable. They are just two more faces in the quiet, subdued crowd of the Golden City. But beneath their soft coats, their hearts are beating with the frantic, terrifying rhythm of a cornered bird. Today is the day the waiting ends. The heavy, suffocating weight of the safe house, the agonizing ticking of the watchmaker's clock, the whispered prayers in the dark, it has all led to this exact piece of pavement, on this exact, beautiful morning. The young man who once worked as a locksmith leans casually against the lamppost. He watches a pair of pigeons cooing and pecking at the cobblestones near his boots. He feels a profound, almost overwhelming wave of tenderness wash over him. He looks at the people walking by, seeing the quiet fear that still tightens their faces, the way they lower their voices when a uniform passes. He loves them. He loves this city, its ancient stones, its sweeping river, its resilient, quiet soul. He reaches his hand into his pocket, his fingertips brushing against the cold, heavy metal hidden there. He is not a man of violence. He is a boy who loves to laugh, a boy who misses his mother's kitchen, a boy who learned to parachute through the Scottish rain simply so he could come home and set his people free. A few paces away, his closest friend stands near a tram stop, holding a leather briefcase. Their eyes meet through the thin crowd. A single, imperceptible nod is shared. The invisible thread that binds them, forged in exile and shared sorrow, pulls tight. Suddenly, a flash of light catches the locksmith's eye. It is a mirror, reflecting the sun from further up the road. The signal. The shadow is coming. The ambient sounds of the spring morning seem to instantly drain away. The cheerful ringing of the approaching tram, the rustle of the chestnut leaves, the distant chatter of the schoolchildren, it all fades into a thick, rushing silence. The young man feels his breath slow down. He draws the crisp spring air deep into his lungs, letting it fill him, anchoring him to the earth. Around the bend, a sleek, dark, open-top car glides into view. It moves with an arrogant, unhurried grace, like a predator strolling through a quiet meadow. In the back seat sits the architect of whispers. The man who cast a net of terror over millions, who signed away innocent lives with a flick of his silver pen, who placed a crown of invisible thorns upon the beautiful city. He is relaxed. He is enjoying the warmth of the sun on his face. He travels without an escort, supremely confident in the paralyzing fear he has created. He believes he is entirely untouchable, a god among cowering mortals. He does not know that the two boys waiting at the curve carry the grief and the desperate hope of an entire nation in their pockets. The hairpin turn is a masterpiece of waiting. The road bends so sharply that the heavy, dark car cannot speed through. It is forced to yield. The tires hum against the stone as the driver presses the brake. The engine drops to a low, rumbling purr. Time slows down, stretching out like warm honey falling from a spoon. The locksmith steps off the curb. He moves smoothly, with the practiced, deliberate grace of a shadow falling across the pavement. He steps directly into the path of the approaching machine. He does not hide his face. He wants the shadow to see him. He wants the tyrant to know that the people he sought to crush are still standing. He raises his hands. The spring coat falls open. He brings the cold, heavy weapon up, leveling it directly at the chest of the man in the back seat. He looks down the iron sights. He does not feel hatred. He feels only a profound, tragic necessity. He is pulling the trigger for the watchmaker whose shop was silenced, for the mother who gave up her rations, for the little girl who left a wooden horse by the door. He squeezes the metal. But the morning does not tear open with fire. There is no thunder. There is only a tiny, hollow, metallic click. A jam. A betrayal of steel and springs. The mechanism, cleaned and polished 100 times in the dark of the safe house, has failed in the light of day. For one agonizing, impossible second, the universe completely stops. The wind ceases to blow. The dust motes hang perfectly still in the sunbeams. The young locksmith and the architect of whispers lock eyes. The distance between them is nothing. The tyrant, realizing what is happening, stands up in the back of the moving car. His hand reaches for his own weapon. But in his pale eyes, the young man sees something extraordinary. The arrogant certainty is gone. The facade of the untouchable god shatters before the bullet even flies. In the tyrant's eyes, there is shock. There is disbelief. And, deep down, there is the sudden, cold realization of his own fragile, mortal flesh. He sees that the boy standing before him is not afraid. The locksmith stands his ground, holding the useless weapon, refusing to look away, refusing to let the shadow regain its power. But the locksmith is not alone. He has never been alone. From the dappled shade of the chestnut tree, his friend steps forward. The boy from the farm, the one who always tried to make the others smile in the drafty London boarding house, moves with swift, beautiful purpose. He reaches into his leather briefcase. He pulls out a hidden weight, a dark object wrapped in the hopes of the exiled. He steps toward the slowing car, stepping into the space his friend has bravely held open. With a graceful, sweeping motion of his arm, he tosses the object through the soft spring air. It arcs slowly, catching a glint of the morning sun as it falls toward the rear of the dark car. And then, the quiet spring morning violently shatters. It is not just a sound, it is a heavy, concussive wave that pushes the air out of the lungs. It is a deafening roar that bounces off the ancient stone walls, echoing down the winding streets and across the gentle river. A thick cloud of dark smoke and pale dust blooms upward, a bruised and angry flower rising into the perfect blue sky. The windows of the passing tram crack in a sudden web of fragile lines. A shower of soft pink blossoms, shaken from the branches by the force of the blast, rains down upon the cobblestones like a sudden, tragic snowstorm. The silence that follows is heavy and ringing, a high-pitched hum that drowns out the screams and the sudden chaos of the street. The boys do not stay to watch the smoke clear. They have done what they came to do. They have struck the invincible armor, proving to the world that the monster can bleed. Through the stinging dust and the rain of falling leaves, they turn and run. They do not run as criminals fleeing a scene, they run as phantoms melting back into the loving embrace of the city that birthed them. They sprint down narrow alleyways, their heavy shoes pounding against the stone, their lungs burning with the sweet, ozone-tinged air. The adrenaline, held at bay for so many agonizing months, finally floods their veins, carrying them away from the wreckage. Back at the hairpin turn, the dark car sits ruined, twisted metal hissing in the sun. The passengers of the tram press their faces against the cracked glass, their eyes wide with a mixture of terror and an unspoken, terrifying awe. The untouchable ruler, the architect who built a mountain of files to crush the human spirit, is suddenly just a wounded man clutching his side in the dust of a city he thought he owned. The illusion of his supreme power lies scattered on the cobblestones, broken as easily as the morning glass. Far away, in the quiet apartments and the hidden hearths, the people of the Golden City hear the distant, muffled thunder. They stop what they are doing. The mother drops her knitting into her lap. The father pauses with his pen hovering over the paper. They look toward the window, sensing a profound shift in the wind. They do not know exactly what has happened, but in the deepest chambers of their hearts, they feel a sudden, terrifying surge of hope. The long, suffocating silence of the occupation has been pierced. The boys from the sky have delivered their message. And as the two friends disappear into the labyrinth of the ancient streets, finding sanctuary in the brave, trembling arms of the ordinary families waiting in the shadows, the spring sun continues to shine, warm and golden, upon a city that has finally remembered how to fight back in the dark. Even the most terrifying monuments of iron and stone must eventually surrender to the quiet and visible rust of time. Beyond the shattered glass and the settling dust of the cobblestone curve, away from the echoing sirens and the sudden, breathless hope that swept through the hidden kitchens of Prague, a different kind of silence began to fall. It was not the heavy, suffocating silence of fear that the architect of whispers had spent years building. It was the sterile, hushed, and profoundly solitary silence of a hospital ward. High on a hill overlooking the winding river, surrounded by the blooming chestnut trees of late spring, the doors of the Bulovka hospital swung closed, shutting out the bright, golden light of the sun. Inside, the corridors smelled sharply of ether, carbolic soap, and freshly laundered cotton. The floors were polished to a dull, mirror-like gleam, reflecting the pale glow of the overhead lamps. It was a place designed for healing, a sanctuary of order and quiet murmurs, suddenly forced to house the man who had brought so much illness to the soul of the city. Imagine the room at the end of the hall. The heavy wooden door is guarded by men in dark, stiff uniforms, their eyes darting nervously at every passing shadow. But inside the room, the terrifying aura of absolute power dissolves into nothing but the pale, crisp folds of white bedsheets. Here lies the ruler of the castle. He has been stripped of his immaculate tunic, stripped of the silver insignia and the polished leather boots that once struck terror into the hearts of millions. Without the armor of his regime, he is shockingly ordinary. He is just a man in a thin hospital gown, his skin pale and slick with the cold sweat of a sudden, violent trauma. The eyes that once scanned neatly typed lists of the condemned now stare blankly at the blank, white ceiling. For the first time in his meticulously orchestrated life, he is no longer the one giving the orders. He is entirely at the mercy of the fragile, failing vessel of his own body. The injury he sustained was not a clean, honorable wound from a battlefield, nor was it a sudden, dramatic end. It was something far more insidious, something that bypassed his heavy guards and his armored train. The blast from the roadside had driven tiny, invisible fragments deep into his flesh. Shards of metal, yes, but also the fine, coarse bristles of horsehair and the soft leather from the luxurious upholstery of his own magnificent car. The very trappings of his immense privilege, the symbols of his untouchable status, had been turned into the instruments of his undoing. Deep within the dark, quiet chambers of his body, these tiny fibers carried a microscopic poison. An infection. It was an enemy that could not be arrested. It could not be intimidated by threats, or filed away in a wooden cabinet, or silenced by the secret police. It was a slow, creeping fire in the blood, indifferent to his titles and deaf to his commands. Moving through this hushed, tense atmosphere are the ordinary men and women of the hospital staff. Let us look through the eyes of a Czech nurse. We will call her Hannah. She is a woman who has spent the last year lowering her eyes on the street, who has wept quietly into her pillow for neighbors who vanished in the night. Now, she is called upon to carry a porcelain basin of warm water into the room of the monster himself. She walks past the guards, her rubber-soled shoes making no sound on the polished floor. Her hands, resting against the cool porcelain, tremble slightly. But the trembling is not born of fear. It is the overwhelming, dizzying weight of the moment. She approaches the bed. She looks down at the man who ordered the closing of her country's universities, the man who cast a shadow over her entire world. He is shivering. A violent, uncontrollable tremor racks his frame as the fever begins to take hold. He mutters softly, the words disjointed and weak. Hannah takes a clean, white cloth. She dips it into the warm water, wrings it out with practiced, gentle hands, and presses it to the tyrant's burning forehead. She does this not out of loyalty to him, and certainly not out of love. She does it because she is a healer, and because she refuses to let his darkness extinguish her own humanity. In her quiet, methodical care, there is a profound, breathtaking dignity. She does not harm him in his vulnerability. She simply watches the truth of the universe assert itself, that under the uniform, the oppressor is just as weak, just as mortal, and just as frightened of the dark as the people he oppressed. Her gentle touch is the ultimate rebellion, a statement that her spirit remains unbroken and pure. As the days blur into a strange, suspended twilight, the temperature in the room seems to rise. The invisible infection spreads its roots. The architect of whispers, the man who built a fortress of absolute, unfeeling logic, begins to lose his grasp on his own mind. The fever burns away the carefully constructed walls of his intellect. In the quiet hours of the night, when the ward is still and the only sound is the rhythmic, ticking mechanical clock on the bedside table, the ghosts come for him. He tosses and turns, tangled in the damp white sheets. Perhaps, in his delirium, he sees the endless rows of index cards fluttering like falling snow. Perhaps he hears the scratching of a million silver pens, writing names that dissolve into smoke before he can read them. He reaches out with a pale, trembling hand, grasping at the empty air, trying to catch the threads of the web he used to control. But there is nothing to hold on to. The power he spent his entire life accumulating, the power that cost him his soul and the lives of countless innocents, cannot buy him a single, cooling breath. It cannot bargain with the rising tide in his lungs. He is wealthy beyond measure in fear, but entirely bankrupt in salvation. A visitor arrives from the north. It is Lena, the young woman who once walked with him along the cold, windswept shores of the Baltic Sea, the woman who had whispered ambitions into the ear of a disgraced naval officer and helped him build an empire of shadows. She sits in a straight-backed wooden chair beside his bed. The grand, sweeping future they had planned together is shrinking rapidly, reducing itself to the four pale walls of this hospital room. She looks at her husband. The sharp, analytical gaze that had so captivated her is gone, replaced by the hazy, wandering stare of a dying man. She reaches out and takes his hand. His skin is burning hot, yet his fingers are strangely weak. She holds onto him as if she can anchor him to the earth by sheer force of will. In the silence of the room, she must surely feel the terrifying weight of their choices. They had built their castle on the ice of human suffering, and now the spring had come, and the ice was cracking beneath their feet. There are no marching bands here. There are no cheering crowds or waving banners. There is only the shallow, ragged breathing of a man who is slowly slipping away, and the profound, isolating loneliness that comes when the illusion of immortality is finally shattered. To watch a tyrant fall is not always to witness a grand, explosive collapse. Sometimes, it is as quiet as a candle burning down to its wick in a sealed room. The doctors in their pristine white coats stand at the foot of the bed. They consult their charts, they whisper in hushed, clinical tones, they try the newest, most desperate treatments. But they are merely actors in a play whose final act has already been written by the rust on a hidden wire, by the dust of a city street. They know, with the quiet certainty of science, that the battle is already lost. The blood has turned against itself. The man in the bed becomes a phantom in his own ward. He hovers in the liminal space between the heavy, painful world he created and the vast, unknown dark that awaits him. He does not know about the brave young men hiding in the crypt of the ancient church, listening to the rain. He does not know about the mothers whispering prayers of hope in their hidden kitchens. He only knows the suffocating heat of the fever, the blinding white light of the ceiling, and the terrifying realization that he is entirely, inescapably alone. He who lived by the whisper, who ruled by the unseen threat, is now silenced by an unseen force. On the final morning, the air in the hospital room is perfectly still. Outside the high windows, the city of Prague is waking up. The first soft rays of the sun catch the golden spires, turning them into beacons of light against the pale dawn sky. The river Vltava continues its ancient, gentle flow, carving its way through the stone valleys just as it has done for millennia, entirely indifferent to the men who claim to rule its banks. Inside the room, the ragged, labored breathing finally slows. It hitches, like a broken gear in a delicate watch, and then, with a soft, shuddering sigh that barely stirs the air, it simply stops. The chest falls one last time, and does not rise again. The silence that fills the room is absolute. It is a heavy, profound emptiness. The guards stand frozen at the door. The nurse, Hannah, stands quietly in the corner, her hands folded neatly over her white apron. She watches the face of the fallen ruler. The lines of tension, the mask of cruel authority, melt away, leaving behind nothing but a pale, empty shell. There is no thunderstorm. The earth does not shake. The world does not end because the architect of fear has left it. Hannah walks slowly to the window. She reaches out and unlatches the glass, pushing it open to let the fresh, sweet air of the spring morning wash into the sterile, heavy room. She hears the distant, cheerful chirp of a sparrow in the chestnut tree. She feels the gentle breeze against her tired face. The monster is gone. He was not a god. He was not an invincible titan forged from steel. He was only a man, as fragile as a dry leaf in the autumn wind, brought down by the very things he could not control, the courage of a boy with a jammed weapon, the dirt of the city he despised, and the quiet, unyielding frailty of his own human heart. The phantom has faded from the ward. And as the morning light spills across the white bedsheets, the ancient, resilient city outside continues to breathe, waking up to a day that feels just a little bit lighter, waiting patiently for the long, dark winter to finally release its hold. Even a river as old as the Vltava can weep when the stones of its city are heavy with sorrow. Listen to the water as it moves through the heart of the golden city. It is a slow, rhythmic sound, a gentle lapping against the ancient stone embankments. For centuries, this river has been the quiet witness to the lives of the people. It has reflected the golden light of the spires, the bright colors of the summer festivals, and the fireworks of a proud, independent nation. But tonight, the water is dark. It flows under a starless sky, carrying with it a silent, invisible tide of grief. The city of 100 spires is holding its breath. The phantom has left the hospital ward, and the shadow he cast from the castle has not vanished. Instead, it has shattered into a million sharp, jagged pieces, falling over the city like a suffocating blanket of ash. The machine he built, the vast and unfeeling web of paper and fear, is thrashing in the dark, desperate to punish the innocent for the courage of the boys who fell from the sky. The beautiful, winding streets of Prague are entirely empty. The cheerful clatter of the evening trams, the soft hum of neighbors talking over garden walls, the laughter of children chasing each other through the squares, all of it has been swallowed by a profound, agonizing silence. It is a curfew not just of the body, but of the soul. Imagine an apartment building, standing quietly in the bruised purple twilight. From the outside, it looks like a tomb. Every window is completely blacked out, sealed tight against the watchful eyes of the patrols that roam the cobblestones below. But inside, behind the heavy curtains and the locked doors, there is life. It is a fragile, trembling life, huddled around the dying embers of cold stoves. Let us step into a room on the second floor. The air is thick and still. Sitting in a worn armchair is a man named Joseph. His hands, usually steady and strong, rest upon his knees. Beside him, sitting on the edge of a narrow bed, is his wife, Marta. Between them, wrapped in a thick woolen blanket, their young son is sleeping. The only light in the room comes from the pale, ghostly glow of the moon filtering through a tiny crack in the blackout blinds. They are waiting. They do not speak. They know that words are dangerous, that even a whisper might carry through the thin walls and reach the wrong ears. They are listening. They are listening to the terrifying, agonizing symphony of the occupied night. Far down the street, there is the low, heavy rumble of a truck engine. It grinds its gears, a harsh, mechanical growl that echoes off the ancient stone. Joseph closes his eyes. He tracks the sound in his mind. The truck turns the corner. It comes closer. The heavy tires roll over the cobblestones, right beneath their window. And then, the engine stops. The silence that follows is the heaviest thing in the world. It presses down on Joseph's chest until he can barely breathe. Marta reaches out in the dark, her fingers finding his. Her skin is cold, but her grip is impossibly fierce. They are waiting for the sound of boots on the stairs. They are waiting for the heavy, splintering knock at the door. In this new, terrifying reality, the knock is the harbinger of the end. It means being pulled from the warmth of your bed, dragged out into the freezing night, and swallowed by the dark, never to return. It means the tearing apart of families, the sudden, violent erasure of a quiet life. Joseph listens. He hears the heavy thud of a door slamming shut on the street. He hears a sharp voice calling out a command in a harsh, foreign tongue. He holds his breath, his thumb gently stroking the back of Marta's hand. He thinks of the small, beautiful life they have built in this room. He thinks of the smell of coffee on a Sunday morning, the sound of his son learning to read, the soft, contented sighs of his wife as she brushes her hair in the evening. He gathers these memories and holds them tight, a fragile shield of love against the approaching terror. Minutes stretch into hours. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticks with a slow, agonizing indifference. Then, the engine roars back to life. The truck pulls away, its heavy tires crunching over the stones, the sound fading slowly into the distance. The shadow has passed their door. For tonight, they are safe. Joseph lets out a long, shuddering breath. He leans forward and presses his face into Marta's shoulder. She wraps her arms around him, burying her face in his neck, her tears soaking silently into the collar of his shirt. It is the quiet, exhausted weeping of those who have survived another hour in the dark. This is the agonizing theater playing out behind thousands of locked doors across the city. The fear is a physical ache, a constant, low-grade fever that leaves the people exhausted and hollow. Yet, even in this suffocating blanket of grief, the human spirit refuses to be entirely extinguished. The courage of the city does not manifest in grand uprisings or shouting in the streets. It is found in the smallest, most heartbreaking acts of quiet heroism. Walk with me down the hall to another apartment, where an elderly woman named Clara sits at her kitchen table. Clara is a widow, a woman who has lived a quiet, unassuming life, her days measured by the blooming of her geraniums and the letters she receives from her family. But tonight, the letters are no longer a source of joy. They have become a deadly liability. In the center of the table sits a beautiful, porcelain bowl, painted with delicate blue flowers. Inside the bowl, Clara has placed a small stack of envelopes. They are letters from her nephew, a young man with a bright smile who, many months ago, kissed her cheek, packed a small bag, and disappeared into the underground resistance. Clara knows the patrols are searching every home. She knows that if they find these letters, if they see his name written in her neat, looping handwriting, they will take her away. But more importantly, she knows they will use her to find him. She takes a single match from a small wooden box. She strikes it against the side. The tiny flame flares to life, casting a warm, dancing light across her wrinkled face. She picks up the first letter. She opens it one last time, her eyes tracing the familiar words. Dear Aunt Clara, the weather here is cold, but my heart is warm. I think of your plum dumplings often. A soft, sad smile touches her lips. She brings the corner of the paper to the flame. The paper curls and turns brown, catching the fire with a soft, crinkling sigh. She drops the burning letter into the porcelain bowl. She watches as the words, the memories, the physical proof of her nephew's love, dissolve into bright orange embers and then fade into gray, weightless ash. She does this for every single letter. She burns the photographs, too. She burns the image of him as a little boy standing by the river. She burns the picture of him at his graduation, looking so proud in his suit. With every photograph that turns to ash, she is erasing a piece of her own heart. She is dismantling her own history to protect the boy she loves. The kitchen fills with the sharp, acrid smell of burnt paper. When the last ember dies, leaving only a pile of delicate gray dust in the beautiful blue bowl, Clara sits back in her chair. Her hands are empty. Her history is gone. But in the quiet dark of her kitchen, she has performed an act of profound, unconditional love. She has built an invisible wall around her nephew, forged from the ashes of her own memories. Outside, the Vltava continues to flow. It absorbs the tears of Joseph and Marta. It carries the scent of Clara's burnt letters out toward the sea. The grief of the city is a heavy, almost tangible thing. It walks the streets like a physical presence. You can feel it in the way neighbors refuse to meet each other's eyes when they pass in the stairwell, not out of unfriendliness, but out of a desperate need to protect one another. If I do not look at you, if I do not acknowledge you, then I cannot betray you when the shadow comes to ask questions. But even in this profound isolation, the threads of community remain unbroken. They are just pulled incredibly tight, drawn invisible across the dark. Imagine a young mother standing in line at the bakery the next morning. The line is long, the faces are pale and drawn, and the air is thick with unspoken fear. The baker, a quiet man with flour on his apron, hands the young mother her meager ration of bread. As she reaches out to take it, the baker's hand brushes against hers. He does not say a word. He does not even look up from the counter. But pressed into the palm of her hand, hidden beneath the rough crust of the loaf, is a tiny, extra piece of bread. It is no larger than a child's fist. The young mother freezes. She looks at the baker, but he has already turned away to serve the next person. She slips the extra piece of bread into her deep pocket, her fingers closing around it like a priceless jewel. In a world that has been ordered to starve, in a city that is being punished for its hope, that tiny piece of bread is a declaration of defiance. It is a whispered promise that they will not let each other fall. The days blur into a terrible, seamless nightmare. The decrees are pasted to the walls, printed in harsh red ink. The lists of the executed are read over the crackling radios, a litany of sorrow that breaks 1,000 hearts every single evening. The city mourns its teachers, its doctors, its shopkeepers, and its students. The people move like ghosts, hauling the heavy burden of their survival through the fog. And yet, every night, when the curfew falls and the darkness returns, the people of Prague retreat to their hidden hearths. They draw the curtains. They hold their children close. They listen to the terrifying sounds of the night, waiting for the heavy knock at the door. But as they sit in the dark, they also listen to the river. Even through the thick walls and the closed windows, if you are very quiet, you can hear the Vltava moving over the stones. It is an ancient, comforting lullaby. The river has seen the city burn before. It has seen conquerors arrive with their banners and their cruelty, and it has seen them eventually wash away into the dust of history. The river knows that no winter lasts forever. The tears of the Vltava fall silently, mourning the innocent who have been swept away. But the water keeps flowing. It does not stop. It moves forward with a quiet, unstoppable grace, carrying the sorrow of the people, holding their memories safe in its dark depths, and whispering a promise to the sleeping city. The night is long. The shadow is heavy. But the stones of the golden city are strong, and the people will endure. They will hold on to each other in the dark, finding warmth in the shared silence, waiting patiently, bravely, for the morning light to finally break across the water. There is a gentle valley where the wind still carries the scent of blossoming cherry trees, even though the trees themselves have long been gone. Close your eyes and let the noise of the world drift away. Imagine a soft, warm evening in the heart of the Bohemian countryside, just as the spring is surrendering to the heavy, golden embrace of early summer. The air here is sweet and thick, carrying the perfume of damp earth, blooming orchards, and the faint, comforting smoke of wood-burning stoves. The tall grass in the meadows sways like a quiet, green ocean in the twilight, and the only sound is the rhythmic, lulling chorus of crickets tuning their instruments for the night. This is the village of Lidice. It is a place far removed from the grand, ancient spires of the capital city, far from the polished conference tables and the heavy iron gates of the castle. It is a humble tapestry woven from quiet lives, simple joys, and the honest, aching labor of working the soil. The people who live here do not concern themselves with the dark machinations of empires. They measure their days by the rising and setting of the sun, by the changing of the seasons, and by the slow, beautiful blooming of the crops in their fields. As the evening deepens into a velvet night, the village begins to sleep. In a small stone cottage near the edge of the woods, a mother leans over the wooden cradle of her infant son. She tucks a soft, woolen blanket around his small, sleeping shoulders, her calloused hand lingering for just a moment against his warm, perfect cheek. She hums a melody passed down through generations, a song older than the stones of her house. Down the lane, an elderly farmer sits on his porch in the dark, smoking a carved wooden pipe, listening to the gentle babble of the small stream that weaves its way through the center of the town. He feels the ache in his knees from a day of tending the orchards, but it is a good ache. It is the ache of a life well lived, rooted deep in the familiar earth. The village is entirely innocent. It is a sanctuary of ordinary, beautiful humanity. But out in the vast, dark world, the phantom has fallen. And the shadow he left behind is thrashing blindly in the night, enraged and wounded, searching for a place to pour out its terrible, overflowing grief. A whisper, entirely false and born of cruel misfortune, has reached the ears of the men in the dark uniforms. A discarded letter, a misunderstood connection, a fragile thread woven from nothing but coincidence, has pointed their hollow, furious eyes toward this peaceful valley. They do not come with the deafening roar of a battlefield. They arrive in the deepest, quietest hours of the night, slipping down the country roads like a cold, suffocating fog rolling in from the mountains. The elderly farmer on his porch is the first to see the headlights. They cut through the gentle summer darkness, stark and unnatural, throwing long, terrifying shadows against the whitewashed walls of the cottages. The heavy engines of the trucks hum with a low, mechanical growl that shakes the wooden floorboards and silences the crickets in the grass. The village wakes, but there is no panic, only a deep, confused stillness. Heavy fists begin to knock on the wooden doors. The voices that call out are harsh, speaking a language that does not belong among the cherry trees. The villagers are told to step outside. They are told to bring nothing, only the clothes upon their backs. Imagine the young mother, her heart suddenly fluttering like a trapped bird against her ribs. She lifts her sleeping infant from the cradle, wrapping him tightly in her arms. Her husband, a quiet man who has only ever known the peaceful rhythm of the harvest, steps in front of her. He places a steady, warm hand on her shoulder. He does not know what is happening, but he tries to offer a silent promise of safety that he cannot possibly keep. Families gather in the center of the village, standing together in the cool night air. The stars above are brilliant and indifferent, witnessing the sudden fracturing of a peaceful world. The villagers look at one another, their faces pale in the glow of the flashlights. Neighbors who have shared bread, who have celebrated weddings and mourned passings together, stand shoulder to shoulder, seeking comfort in the familiar presence of their community. Then, the sorting begins. It is done with a terrifying, bureaucratic calmness. The men and boys over the age of 15 are told to stand on one side of the square. The women and the small children are directed to the other. This is the moment the true weight of the night settles upon literacy. It is not the threat of violence that breaks the heart, but the agonizing, unnatural tearing apart of the human bonds that hold the universe together. The young mother clings to her husband's arm. Her fingers dig into the rough fabric of his coat. They are given only a few seconds. The world slows down, distilling an entire lifetime of love into a single, desperate embrace. The husband leans down. He brushes a stray lock of hair from his wife's forehead. He kisses her softly, breathing in the scent of her skin one last time. "I will see you soon," he whispers, his voice trembling just enough to betray the lie. "Take care of our boy. Keep him warm." He pulls his coat from his shoulders and drapes it over hers, a final, beautiful gesture of protection against the chill of the unknown. He steps away, joining the line of men. He does not look back, because he knows that if he turns and sees her weeping face, his legs will refuse to carry him any further. Across the square, a grandfather kneels down in the damp grass to look his little granddaughter in the eyes. She is clutching a small, rag doll tightly to her chest, her large eyes wide with silent confusion. He reaches out with his withered, trembling hands and gently cups her face. He smiles, a soft, brave smile meant only for her. "Be a brave girl for your mother," he murmurs, his thumb tracing the tear that spills over her eyelashes. "I will come find you when the sun rises." The women and children are ushered into the heavy, waiting trucks. The engines roar to life. As the vehicles begin to roll away, disappearing down the dark country road, the women press their faces against the canvas flaps. They look back at the village they have loved, at the silhouettes of their fathers, their brothers, and their husbands standing quietly in the dark. They reach their hands out into the empty air, grasping at the fading shadows, until the valley is swallowed completely by the night. The men are led to a large farm at the edge of the village. The horizon is just beginning to lighten, painting the edges of the sky in bruised hues of purple and pale, tragic gold. The summer sun is rising, completely unaware that it is shining upon the end of a world. There are no grand speeches. There are no acts of dramatic defiance. The men of Lidice stand together against the stone wall of the barn. They are farmers, bakers, and school teachers. They are fathers and sons. In these final, suspended moments, they do not weep for themselves. They look out over the gentle, rolling hills of their home. They think of the women in the trucks, praying that the shadow will spare them. They think of the cherry trees that will bloom again next spring, even if they are not there to see the white petals fall. They reach out in the cool morning light and take each other's hands. The old farmer holds the hand of the young husband. They link their fingers together, forming a quiet, unbreakable chain of brotherhood. They close their eyes, listening to the gentle rustle of the wind in the tall grass, holding onto the deep, enduring love of their families as the morning suddenly shatters. When the silence returns to the valley, it is absolute. But the shadow is not satisfied with simply taking the lives of the innocent. It seeks to perform a miracle of dark, bureaucratic magic. It seeks to unmake the village entirely, to erase it so completely that history itself might forget it ever existed. The orders are given, and the cold machinery of destruction moves in. Over the coming weeks, the stone cottages are torn down, brick by brick. The rubble is carted away or buried deep in the earth. The beautiful, blooming orchards are cut down, the heavy, fruit-bearing branches left to rot in the sun. The shadow goes so far as to alter the very landscape. The gentle stream that babbled through the center of the town is diverted, forced into a new path so that even the water cannot remember where it used to flow. They plow the ground where the houses stood. They plant new crops over the foundations. They even dig up the ancient cemetery, desecrating the resting places of the ancestors, determined to prove that Lidice is not a place, but a blank, empty field. They remove its name from every map, from every official registry. They believe that by destroying the stones and erasing the ink, they have achieved total oblivion. But the shadow does not understand the profound, resilient nature of love, or the stubborn memory of the human heart. You can divert a river, but you cannot stop the water from reaching the sea. You can cut down an orchard, but the earth will always remember the roots. And you can erase a name from a piece of paper, but you can never, ever erase a soul. The village of Lidice did not die under the summer sun. It merely fell into a deep, eternal sleep. Far away, across the oceans and the mountains, the world heard the whisper of what had happened in the quiet Bohemian valley. The attempt to erase the village had the exact opposite effect. Instead of disappearing, the name of Lidice was suddenly spoken in a million homes. Mothers in distant countries wept for the children torn from their cradles. Fathers looked at their sons and felt the profound, aching sorrow of the men who stood by the barn wall. Towns across the globe changed their names to Lidice, refusing to let the title fade into the dark. Newborn girls were christened with the name, carrying the memory of the village forward in their very breath. The shadow had tried to bury a community, but they did not realize they were planting seeds that would bloom across the entire earth. If you walk through that gentle valley today, the wind still moves through the tall grass with the same soft, lulling sound. The physical houses are gone, but the presence of the people remains, heavy and sweet in the summer air. There is a monument there now, a quiet gathering of bronze children looking back toward the place where their homes used to stand. They are frozen in time, their faces holding the innocence of that final summer night. They do not look angry. They look peaceful, watchful, and eternally patient. They are the guardians of a love that outlasted the darkness. They remind us that the quietest, most ordinary lives are capable of leaving the most indelible marks upon eternity. The men holding hands in the dawn, the mother passing her warmth through a woolen coat, the grandfather wiping a tear from a little girl's cheek. These fleeting, beautiful moments of grace are the true foundation of the world, stronger than any stone, and entirely immune to the fire. The village only sleeps, resting softly beneath the green grass and the endless, starry sky, cradled forever in the unbroken memory of a world that refused to forget. There is a profound, holy silence that belongs only to the very heart of the earth. Far beneath the sunlit, cobbled streets of the Golden City, hidden away from the watchful eyes of the patrols and the heavy, marching boots of the occupiers, lies a sanctuary built of ancient, unyielding stone. To reach it, you must leave the world of the living behind. You must walk through the heavy wooden doors of a quiet church, moving past the altar where beeswax candles burn with a soft, flickering devotion, and descend a narrow, winding staircase into the cool, damp dark. Down here, the air is completely still. It smells of turned earth, of old dust, and of the faint, sweet memory of frankincense that has seeped into the very mortar over hundreds of years. This is the crypt. It was built to hold the resting places of the forgotten, to be a quiet waiting room for eternity. But in these final, fading days of spring, it has become a womb of refuge for the boys who fell from the sky. They are all here now. The young men from the snowy Bohemian forests, the exiles from the rainy Scottish highlands, gathered together in the belly of the city they love so fiercely. In the dim, subterranean twilight, illuminated only by a single, shaded lantern resting on a stone tomb, they do not look like soldiers. They look like brothers who have traveled a very long, very tiring road, and have finally been allowed to rest. Their heavy coats are gone, replaced by damp, knitted sweaters. Their faces are smudged with dust and shadow, their eyes bruised with an exhaustion so deep it reaches into their bones. Yet, if you look closely into those eyes, you will not find the frantic, hunted terror of cornered prey. You will find a profound, settling peace. The terrible, agonizing wait is over. The mission is complete. The phantom who built a kingdom of fear has been swept away, and the spell he cast over their homeland is broken. They know, with the quiet, intuitive wisdom of those who live on the absolute edge of life, that the shadow above is thrashing in its grief, tearing the city apart to find them. They know that a whisper, a fragile thread of betrayal, has likely already pointed the dark forces toward the heavy wooden doors of the church. But down here, in the sanctuary of the crypt, time seems to slow down and stretch out, wrapping them in a final, gentle embrace. How do young men spend their final hours in the dark? They do not spend them in anger. They do not pace the stone floors shaking their fists at the cruel turning of the world. They sit close together on the cold, uneven ground. They lean against one another, shoulder to weary shoulder, finding warmth in the simple, beautiful nearness of a friend. The boy who used to work on a farm closes his eyes and leans his head back against a stone pillar. He speaks in a soft, lulling whisper. He tells the others about the way the morning mist used to rise off his father's fields just before the sun broke the horizon. He talks about the smell of the damp hay, the heavy, contented breathing of the horses in the barn, and the taste of the sharp, sweet apples they would pick in the late autumn. He builds a world of memory in the dark, and his friends walk through it with him, leaving the cold walls of the crypt entirely behind. The young locksmith listens, a gentle, tired smile playing upon his lips. He reaches out and rests his hand on his friend's knee. It is a quiet gesture of profound love, an unspoken acknowledgement of the incredible journey they have shared. From the rainy streets of London, to the freezing night sky, to the terrifying sunlit curve in the road, they have walked every step together. The bond between them is no longer just friendship, it is a sacred, unbreakable tether woven from shared sacrifice and pure devotion. Once a day, the heavy wooden door at the top of the stairs creaks open, just a fraction. A priest slips down into the dark. He is a man of God, an ordinary man with graying hair and trembling hands, who chose to open his church to the hunted when the rest of the world locked its doors. He carries a small tin bucket of fresh water and a basket containing a few pieces of crusty bread and a small wedge of hard cheese. He moves through the crypt like a gentle ghost, his long dark robes brushing softly against the stone. He does not ask them about the war. He does not ask them what they have done. He simply kneels beside them on the damp earth. The boys reach out with dirt-stained hands to take the bread. They break it carefully, making sure every man gets an equal share. As they drink the cool, sweet water from a shared tin cup, the priest raises his hand. He traces the sign of a blessing in the dim air, his voice a barely audible murmur of ancient, comforting words. It is a moment of pure, everyday heroism, a man risking his own life, risking the destruction of his holy sanctuary, simply to offer a cup of water to the thirsty. The young men look up at him, their eyes shining with a deep, wordless gratitude. They are strangers, yet in this dark room, they are a family bound by the quiet, defiant grace of human kindness. When the priest leaves, the silence returns, heavier and sweeter than before. The young men cannot write letters. There is no paper here, no ink, and no wind to carry their words back to the mothers and sweethearts waiting in the hidden kitchens of the world. So, they write the letters in their minds. Imagine a young paratrooper sitting with his knees drawn up to his chest. In the quiet dark, he sends his thoughts upward, through the heavy ceiling, through the nave of the church, up into the starry night sky. He whispers to his mother. "Do not weep for me," he thinks. "I am not cold. I am not afraid. I am sitting here with my brothers, and my heart is completely full. We did what we had to do, so that one day, you can walk down the street without looking over your shoulder. I love you, and I am at peace." He seals the thought with a sigh, trusting the unseen currents of the universe to carry the feeling of his love back to the home he will never see again. But the sanctuary of the stone cannot hold back the turning of the world forever. Eventually, the morning arrives, though no sunlight penetrates the crypt. The arrival of the dawn is announced not by the singing of birds, but by the sudden, heavy thunder of boots on the marble floors far above. The shadow has finally come. Muffled shouts echo down the narrow stairwell. The heavy wooden doors of the church are splintered and broken. The storm has broken over their heads. Yet, down in the crypt, there is no panic. The boys do not scramble wildly in the dark. They slowly rise to their feet. They brush the damp earth from their trousers. They look at each other, and an unspoken, profound understanding passes between them. High above, the noise swells into a chaotic, terrifying roar. But the friends have retreated into the deepest, most secure fortress of all, the fortress of their own autonomy. They know they are surrounded. They know there is no hidden tunnel, no secret door that leads to the river. They are cornered at the bottom of the earth. Then, the water begins to flow. The shadow, desperate to pull them from their sanctuary, turns heavy hoses toward the small, barred ventilation window high on the crypt wall. The water comes crashing into the dark room in a freezing, relentless torrent. It pools on the stone floor, swirling around their boots, rising steadily higher. It is shockingly cold, but to the boys, it does not feel like a weapon. As the water rises to their knees, and then to their waists, it feels almost like an embrace. It is the water of their city. It is the spirit of the Vltava, reaching down into the dark to hold them one last time. They stand together in the freezing, rising tide, their shoulders touching, bracing against the current. The water climbs higher. The noise from above grows more frantic, more desperate. The captors want to drag them out into the light. They want to put them in chains, to parade them through the streets, to break their spirits and display them as a warning to the world. They want to strip them of their dignity and turn their brave sacrifice into a spectacle of defeat. But the friends have made a quiet, unshakable pact. They will not belong to the architect's machine. They will not be taken back into the world of fear. They belong to the free air, to the snowy forests, to the rainy moors, and to each other. They hold the ultimate key to their own deliverance, and they will choose the terms of their departure. The young locksmith turns to his dearest friend, the boy from the farm. The water is up to their chests now, numbing their limbs, but their faces are serene. They embrace. It is a slow, heavy hug in the freezing dark. They press their wet, cold cheeks together. There are no dramatic speeches. There is only a whispered, "Thank you," spoken into a damp collar. There is a gentle, "I will see you soon." One by one, the brothers share this final, beautiful communion. They hold each other, recognizing the profound honor of having lived, and now leaving, together. They have fought the monsters of the world, and they have kept their souls entirely intact. They step back. They look at the small sliver of gray light filtering through the pouring water at the ventilation window. They listen to the frantic, angry shouting of the men above, men who are terrified of the dark, men who will never understand the pure, unbreakable power of love. The friends raise their hands. Not in surrender to the shadow, but in a final, absolute claim to their own freedom. They close their eyes, letting the memory of the blooming cherry trees, the warm summer grass, and the soft, lullaby flow of the river fill their minds one last time. They choose to close the door behind them. They choose to slip away on their own terms, stepping out of the physical world and into the eternal, unblemished light of memory. The heavy, echoing sounds in the crypt suddenly cease. The water continues to pour, but it falls into a room that is perfectly, profoundly peaceful. The physical struggle is over. The boys who fell from the sky have taken flight once more. When the shadow finally breaks into the crypt, they find only silence. They find the cold water, the ancient stone, and the empty vessels of the fallen. But the boys are not there. They have already slipped through the cracks in the ceiling, rising up through the floorboards of the church, drifting out over the rooftops of the Golden City. They have become the wind that rustles the chestnut trees. They have become the morning mist rising off the Vltava. They have become the quiet, enduring strength in the hearts of every mother and father who will one day walk the beautiful, sunlit streets of a free Prague. In the damp dark of the crypt, the eternal silence resumes its watch, holding the memory of their brotherhood like a precious, holy secret, safe within the unyielding embrace of the stone. The longest and most terrifying nights must always, eventually, surrender to the soft and unstoppable breaking of the dawn. Imagine the very first rays of the morning sun as they crest the green hills surrounding the Golden City. For so long, the light here seemed filtered through a lens of sorrow, casting long, bruised shadows across the ancient cobblestones. But time is a quiet and relentless healer. The sun rises today just as it did centuries ago, pale and brilliant, washing the red rooftops in a warm, honeyed glow. It touches the high windows of the castle on the hill, but the castle is no longer a fortress of whispers and fear. It is simply a beautiful old building, resting peacefully against the clear blue sky, returned to the people who love it. The heavy, suffocating winter of the occupation is gone. The ice has melted, retreating into the deep earth, and the spring that the young men dreamed of has finally, permanently, arrived. If you walk through the winding, narrow streets of Prague today, you will not hear the harsh, mechanical growl of the dark trucks. You will not hear the terrifying, synchronized striking of heavy boots against the stone. Instead, the city is filled with a beautiful, ordinary symphony. You can hear the gentle chiming of the tram bells, ringing like cheerful greetings as they glide around the gentle curves of the avenues. You can hear the melodic hum of conversations spilling out of open cafe doors, punctuated by the clinking of porcelain cups and the sudden, unburdened sound of open laughter. The people walking these streets do not keep their heads bowed. They do not hurry past one another with their eyes fixed on the ground. They stroll. They linger in the sunlit squares, holding the hands of their children, stopping to admire the blooming flowers in the window boxes. They have reclaimed the rhythm of their own lives. Let us look closely at an elderly woman sitting on a wooden bench in a small, leafy park. Her hair is the color of spun silver, and her face is lined with 1,000 smiles and 1,000 quiet sorrows. Her hands rest gently in her lap, holding a small paper bag of sweet crumbs. She tosses them, one by one, to a flock of cooing pigeons that gather near her feet. Decades ago, she was the little girl who slept in the small room down the hall, wrapped in the heavy blankets her mother wove by hand. She was the child who woke up in the hushed twilight of a terrified city, wondering why the adults spoke only in whispers. She remembers the strangers who lived behind the heavy oak wardrobe. She remembers their damp woolen coats, their soft, exhausted eyes, and the way they would sit on the floor and tell her stories of rain-swept moors and wild heather. She did not fully understand the danger then. She only knew that her parents had opened their door to the dark and invited the light inside. Now, sitting in the warm sunshine, she watches her own grandchildren running across the green grass. They are chasing a brightly colored ball, tumbling and shrieking with absolute, unclouded joy. They have never known the sharp knock at the door in the middle of the night. They have never had to learn the terrifying mathematics of ration tickets or the heavy burden of keeping a lethal secret. As she watches them, a profound, quiet gratitude settles over her heart. She knows that their innocent laughter is the living, breathing legacy of those two young men who fell from the freezing night sky. The boys from the Scottish Highlands did not survive to see this sunny afternoon, but their sacrifice bought this very moment. They traded their own tomorrows so that this little girl could grow old, and so that her grandchildren could run freely over the green earth. She closes her eyes, tilts her face toward the warmth of the sun, and silently whispers her thanks into the gentle breeze. This is how the true history of the world is written. The tyrants and the architects of fear believe they can carve their legacies into iron and stone. They build massive monuments to their own power. They create vast, intricate webs of paper and files, convinced that through terror, they can control the human soul. They think they are immortal. But fear is a fragile, brittle architecture. When the tyrant falls, when the phantom succumbs to the quiet frailty of his own flesh, the empire of shadows instantly begins to rust. The files crumble to dust in abandoned rooms. The iron gates are torn down. The monuments are dismantled, their stones repurposed to build homes and bakeries and schools. The men who sought to rule by cruelty become nothing more than cautionary whispers, fading into the margins of history, remembered only for the sorrow they caused. But the memory of love is entirely different. Love is woven into the very roots of the earth. The quiet heroism of the ordinary people, the mother who ladled the hidden soup, the father who locked the door against the night, the baker who slipped an extra piece of bread into a trembling hand. These acts do not rust. They become the bedrock of the city. They are the invisible mortar that holds the ancient cobblestones together. Think of the letters written by the dim light of the peat fire, far away on the edge of the world. Those fragile pieces of paper, covered in looping ink and hidden in a wooden box, eventually found their way home. They are kept now under soft glass, in quiet rooms where people come to remember. The ink has faded to a pale, ghostly brown. The paper is yellowed and incredibly delicate. But when you read the words, the gentle lies about warm blankets, the profound declarations of unending love, the quiet pleas not to weep, the emotion leaps across the decades, as vivid and powerful as the moment the pen touched the page. The single, dry tear that fell upon the corner of the letter is a monument far greater and far more enduring than any statue ever built. It is the pure, unyielding proof that even in the absolute depths of the dark, the human heart remains a vessel of profound and beautiful light. There is a quiet church on a winding street in the city. It is the church where the wooden doors were once splintered, where the heavy boots thundered across the marble floors, and where the freezing water poured into the dark crypt. Today, the doors are open wide, welcoming the warm spring air. People walk down the narrow stone steps into the crypt, but they do not walk in fear. They walk with a quiet, sacred reverence. The damp earth has been cleared away. The walls still bear the scars of that final, desperate morning, the deep gouges in the stone standing as silent witnesses to the unbroken brotherhood of the boys who chose the free air. But the crypt is not a place of horror. It is a place of profound peace. Small, flickering candles cast a warm, golden glow against the ancient stone. Visitors leave tiny offerings, a single, blooming lilac branch, a handwritten note folded into a perfect square, a silent prayer breathed into the cool air. The sanctuary remains a sanctuary, not just for the men who rested there, but for the soul of the nation they loved. It is a quiet room where the living can come to touch the very edge of courage, to draw strength from the memory of those who held each other in the rising water and refused to let go. Outside, just a short walk away, the river Vltava continues its endless, gentle journey. It flows under the grand, ancient bridges, where the stone statues of saints and kings stand watch over the water. The river carried the tears of the hidden families. It carried the ashes of the burned letters. But water is the great purifier, the eternal cleanser of the world. As it moves toward the sea, it washes away the heavy residue of the shadow. Now, in the late afternoon, the surface of the river is a mirror of shimmering gold and pale blue. Small boats drift lazily along the current. Couples walk arm in arm along the embankments, leaning against the warm stone walls to watch the swans glide silently through the reflections of the chestnut trees. The city is breathing. It is a slow, deep, restful breath. The watchmaker winds his clocks, and the chiming is a joyous, musical sound. The students sit in the open squares, their heads bent over thick books, free to read the poetry of their ancestors without fear. The violin strings are no longer broken, they sing with a warm, vibrant resonance, a melody that invites the world to listen, a melody that celebrates the simple, breathtaking privilege of being alive. As the sun begins to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in deep, restful shades of violet and rose, the golden city prepares for sleep. But it is not the terrifying, suffocating sleep of the occupation. It is the peaceful, restoring slumber of a home that knows it is safe. The doors are locked not out of terror, but out of comfort. The curtains are drawn to keep the warmth in, not to hide from the unseen eyes. The longest night has passed. The dawn has broken beyond the stones, and the light has settled comfortably into the hidden hearths. And so, as the stars begin to bloom in the clear, quiet sky, let the memory of the winter fade away. Let the gentle flow of the river soothe your weary mind. Rest in the profound, comforting knowledge that courage always outlasts cruelty, that the darkest shadows are always chased away by the morning, and that love, in all its quiet, everyday forms, is the only thing in this world that truly lives forever. Close your eyes. Listen to the soft, rhythmic breathing of the peaceful city. The heroes are resting. The world is calm. And the dawn is waiting, patient and bright, just beyond the edge of your dreams.